Good evening, and welcome to the August 23rd, 2021 Board of Education meeting for the Cedar Rapids Community School District. The meeting is now called to order. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move that the agenda of Monday, August 23rd, 2021 Board of Education meeting be approved as set forth, and that each item is considered ready for discussion and/or action.
Is there a second?
Second.
This is a roll call vote.
Director Riesinger. Director Newman. Aye. Director Borcherding. Aye. Director Merschbach. Aye. Director Garlock. Aye. Director Tominski.
Aye.
President Humbles.
Aye. Next, we'll move to our public hearing for the Kingston Stadium Maintenance Shop Project. Board Secretary Day, have we received any written correspondence related to the public hearing on tonight's agenda?
We have received no written correspondence regarding this public hearing.
Thank you. So the public hearing is now officially closed. Do we have, I'm sorry, let me move back. Do we have anyone who requested to address the board this evening? I want to make sure that I didn't miss that.
Not with regards to the public hearing.
Okay, thank you. Next, we will move to our superintendent's report.
Thank you, President Humbles, and good evening, Board of Directors, and good evening, community members. Happy first day of school. An incredible launch to get to this destination today. As you can see, we have learners in our schools today, all over campus welcoming our kids back indoors. Many of them had not been indoors for more than 18 months, as some of them had chosen remote instruction. I saw a kiddo this morning who said, "It's my first time here," second grade. So really exciting for them. And so, as you can see, smiling faces in our hallways and just the energy and excitement. I just can't tell you enough. I know I can't overemphasize it. This didn't happen overnight. This has been a very long journey. And to get to today, pandemic, derecho, so many things that impacted our school district. Our staff has worked so incredibly hard to make sure things happened for all families today. And our families, your partnership, your patience, your help, your support, just hands up to everybody just to make today happen. We had today, in addition to in-person opportunity, we also had our virtual academy open for the second year. Over 375 elementary and middle school students in CRVA today full-time, and hundreds of high school students from taking just one class to a full schedule in CRVA. Very happy that we can continue to offer that as our 32nd school in our district. So thanks again to all of those who've said yes to that opportunity and continue to make it happen, from our tech department to teachers to administrators, and again, to our families. And drum roll, everyone. Oh yes, today it happened. West Willow opened the doors, our brand new elementary school. I was very happy to be there this morning with several of our district office administrators, Principal O'Connell, John Galbraith. I'm going to do it. Would you just give a wave? You deserve it. Our buildings and grounds team and the management of our construction company, what they have done in a matter of 2 weeks to get kids in the building today is just phenomenal. And I've been through construction experiences before, but with the pandemic and interruptions with manufacturing, there were complications to say the least, and this is just an amazing opportunity. Because of the rain this morning, there were a few puddles here and there, and a first grade friend said to me, there are ponds everywhere at our new school. But beautiful, and staff has worked so hard to get their classrooms ready, so thank you, West Willow team. The West is open, my friends. And then finally, as we are rolling into this year, lots of questions around the continued conversations of how we mitigate and manage COVID-19. So last week, there were some additional news opportunities that we were all riding through. And so just some reminders. about what's in front of us and how we'll continue to manage moving forward. Yes, the Delta variant has caused a rise in cases. Therefore, there are increased questions from folks. So we have, as a school district, we recommend that folks wear masks. It's a mitigation effort. It's not a requirement. But we do require it on our buses, as that's part of the CDC guidelines. Public transportation and school transportation falls under one umbrella, and then school environments, the buildings, fall under a different umbrella. So we don't require it in our buildings, but we do require it on our buses. Mitigation efforts continue, encouraging hand washing, hand sanitizing, and just making sure we're taking care of ourselves. And we will continue, of course, to monitor and respond and communicate accordingly. Lots of questions around isolation versus quarantining. So just so that everyone understands, when someone has tested positive or they have COVID-19 symptoms, we are, along with Iowa Department of Public Health alignment, request isolation for 10 days until symptom-free, or through, if you're tested positive, that's the isolation time period. Quarantining has shifted because of vaccinations. So it's not required if you've been exposed to someone positive, if you've been vaccinated and you're exposed to someone, to quarantine. However, with the increased positivity rate, we know we have to keep a very close eye on this as a school district. So if our quarantine measures need to shift, we will. That might need resources, it might need adjustment, but we also know the state no longer has school districts access to a waiver, which we had last year to request for remote instruction. So we will respond accordingly as we need to, but the number one thing is safety continues to be our priority, and we want kids in school, and we want them to be healthy, and we want our staff to be healthy, and we want to work together with our community to do the very best that we can, which means we continue to ride the wave, friends. Flexibility and respond based on the information that we have. So that's all I have for you tonight. President Humbles and Board of Directors, happy first day of school. Happy New Year.
Thank you for the update. Do we have any board reports? Well, I'd like to say, as part of my board report, I'd like to read a statement on behalf of the Cedar Rapids Community School Board of Directors. During the last 18 months, our board has consistently and publicly advocated for local control of decisions that impact our students and families. In May, the Iowa legislature passed and Governor Reynolds signed House File 847, making it illegal for school boards to mandate masks in schools. This law has taken local control away from us and put it in the hands of people outside our community. While we disagree with the law and its intent, it is a law. We believe such decisions are best left to local boards. Our state government decided otherwise. If this board were to mandate masks in our schools, we would be breaking the law. Unlike other states with a ban on mask mandates, Iowa is the only state in which the ban has been enacted through legislation rather than an executive order. We have no doubt that breaking this law would result in consequences. Breaking this law could put our administration in peril. It could have licensure implications for our staff and funding implications for our district. In the past year, we have seen school districts suffer consequences for asserting local control when local decisions were in opposition of a state directive. We do not want to put our district in that situation. It is clear from previous discussions at the board table that this board supports following the CDC guidelines regarding masks. I think it's safe to say that we all believe the best way to protect our students, our staff, our families, is to follow the CDC guidelines. Wear a mask, maintain social distance, and wash your hands frequently. These strategies have been proven to be effective. Governor Reynolds has the authority to issue an executive order rescinding this ban on mask mandates. Decisions like this should be made on the local level by locally elected representatives of the community. We want to do what is best for the health and safety of our community, but the law prevents that. We encourage those of you who disagree with this law to contact the governor's office. As a board, we are asking you, the community, to do what will keep our students and staff safe. We strongly urge you to wear masks, socially distance, and continue to wash your hands. And thank you on behalf of the board. Next, we will move to communications, delegations, and petitions. Excuse me. Board Secretary, do we have any speakers registered to address the board this evening?
Yes, we do.
Before we hear from those who have requested to address the board, I'd like to remind you to please state your name and address for the record when called. You will be given up to 5 minutes for your remarks. Board Secretary Day will serve as your timer and inform you when your time is up. Additionally, in order to abide by the open meeting law, I'd like to remind our speakers that there will be no dialogue between the board members and the public during this time except to clarify the nature of the questions or comments from the individual speaking. Laurel, could you please call our first speaker?
Our first speaker this evening is Dean Piper. Dean is here to talk with the board about the SRO officers' presence and positives. Dean, if you would step to the podium, please. Thank you.
My name is Dean Piper, address 5125 Prairie Trail, Marion, Iowa. I work for the Cedar Rapids Community School District. I've had the privilege to have an SRO officer in our school that I'm very proud to work with and introduce our kids to every chance I get. Our population comes to us transitioning from other towns and carries their own set of challenges and behaviorally and psychologically. Trauma is a major influence on their prior experience and what they bring to us to coach them through. Specific things that our population has benefited from is having an SRO officer in the building is for safety. We've had some students overwhelmed by mental health and academics. Sometimes self-harm has become their release. In high-risk moments, it has been beneficial to have an officer who our kids are familiar with to respond if they get to the point where things are overwhelming. They know our kids by name, they interact and have things to build on to help de-escalate as neutral figures. They strive to support these young individuals outside the classrooms. By pulling SROs, this prior connection is severed. Response for our population is critical. When we have students in major crisis cycle, we have had several incidents of students self-harm reach unsafe intervention. As students are in the road ignoring oncoming traffic or have left suicidal notes and eloped. In these incidents, our staff was thankful to have an SRO to respond and block traffic or help in safely talking the student from fatal decisions. All because of our connection and tools they offer our staff and our students. All these interactions translate to students seeing officers without uniforms and as individuals. I have the privilege, I have the privilege of also working with youth when they are detained. Many youth ask for the SRO officers' numbers to seek them out to help them with frustration or get through the time in detention. I also hear about the students who will refer to only the officers that are their SROs when in need or talking to officers outside of school hours. Connections translate to trust. One last role I have observed is educating students. An individual engaged in inappropriate internet use at the school was approached by the SR officer after they had asked for help. This officer acted as an educator with the student. His presence was able to educate this individual who had never taken into account legal accountability as a deterrent. Knowing the laws, officers and force help students understand how to make educated decisions and avoid high-level interventions. Again, due to a student trusting the officer and seeking his input. Thank you.
Evening is Jolynn Schwartzendruber. Jolynn would like to speak with the board about the SROs.
Good evening. My name is Jolynn Schwartzendruber, 1885 Southbrook Drive, Ely, Iowa 52227. My role at Metro is an engagement specialist, and I've been there 2 years this October. Our SRO, Ashley Steele, I have known throughout that time. She has advocated for students, she's advocated for faculty, she's advocated for the community, and she's done so with extreme professionalism, kindness, compassion, and a true desire to be part of Metro High School. It isn't a have to for Ashley. It is a want to and a choice to. I have seen numerous restorative conversations that have mitigated future and larger situations, and that happens on a regular basis. I truly can't imagine being at Metro High School without Ashley as part of our presence. When our graduation changed, Ashley was one of the first ones who was outside as we were greeting our families, keeping our social distancing, and allowing our 150 plus graduates to be able to take their walk across the stage. And Ashley Steele was someone who congratulated every single one of them. She has a trust in our staff, faculty, and students to the point that she has her young son in our daycare. Our students are actively caring for him, working with her. It's an excellent example of someone who has chosen to put one of the most, if not the most valuable resource in her life in the care of those of us at Metro. I've seen her be an excellent ambassador within the community, in the walls of Metro, as well as out in the community, and even when we had our Metro prom at the Czech Museum. I was unable to attend, but most pictures she was part of, and she was without question a stable force in that function, not only being successful, but celebrated and able to be something that we can look at doing again. Like I said, I have had nothing but positive experiences and cannot imagine having the professionalism, the expertise, and the partnership between the Cedar Rapids Police Department through Ashley and within our staff, faculty, and students. She genuinely wants to be there, and we want her there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Corey Dahm. Corey would like to speak this evening about school resource officers.
Hello, my name is Corey Dahm, and my address is 2315 D Avenue Northeast. In the last board meeting and in the media, the police department has stated that the arrests in schools are minimal. However, arrest totals are only part of the story. The students have contact with resource officers in situations outside of arrest scenarios. My son goes to Washington High School. Last year, right before spring break, there was a situation where he accidentally cracked the windshield of another student's car after school. I was called by the administration and told about the situation. The security tapes had been reviewed, and it was agreed that it was an accident. Devontae had already agreed to pay for the damage. After all of this, the resource officer still felt the need to come to my home and speak with my son. The incident did not happen during school hours. No one was at risk. This was purely intimidation. The officer making sure my son knew he was on his radar. There was no arrest, but these are still some of the day-to-day contacts that our students are experiencing. This impacts the mental health and the kids' attitude towards school in general. My son is a black child. To me, if the police department refuses to look at the full picture instead of just arrest records and statistics, it proves they're not trying to change the system, only justify it. If there's no correlation between the bias we see in adult policing and the resource officers, why were the schools that have resource officers assigned as they were? Of course, there are situations in which an officer has been able to help. The extra training that these officers receive is not as comprehensive as the training someone like a social worker or mediation staff have. And the appropriate staff could approach the situations without having to overcome the intimidation factor caused by police. Those who are in the role and truly effective at it know that they are more social workers than police officers, and they could do the job without a uniform and a gun. And I did not mention this at the beginning, I'm also on the board of Advocates for Social Justice, and our interest in the status of the school resource officers is parallel to our interest as policing as a whole. We already know the police department has racial biases that can clearly be seen in adult arrest records. By putting police in the school system, we've just extended that dysfunction. Please remove the full-time police officers from our schools.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Candy Bakaris. Candy is here to speak about paraeducator pay. And following Candy will be Danny Levy.
Good afternoon. Candy Bakaris, 2318 25th Street Southwest, and I am here speaking on paraeducator pay as the CROTA president. For the last few months, you've heard the vital roles paraeducators play in educating our students and how there are many paras who cannot afford to work in our district, even though they love what they do. I can share heartbreaking stories of struggles our paras have when it comes to housing, food, and paying their bills. But hopefully some of that message has come through with the paraeducators who have shared their stories with you. I have paras who reach out on a regular basis sharing how they cannot continue to work 2 and 3 jobs and continue to have their own children suffer. How they cannot use the district-provided health insurance because they cannot pay the co-pays, the deductibles, or pay for the prescribed medications. Telling me how they can earn several dollars an hour more doing an entry-level job which requires little to no skills. Even how they can go to other local districts and earn over $15 an hour to start out. These are people who do not want to leave our district, but have to because they know the 17-cent increases are never going to get them where they need to be. We just had a para share that she'll be making nearly $17 an hour after her first 90 days at a neighboring district. She did not want to leave us, but she had no choice for her family. And yes, this is a former Cedar Rapids para who, like many others have or are going to, have to leave our district. We have quality veteran people who are looking for other jobs because the increases here for the para group have been abysmal, and each year that we've tried to bargain, even showing how a multi-year agreement could work and help us get to better wages, we have been told repeatedly the school board only gives authority for all groups to settle at the same amount. As you can see, this has only made the disparity worse for the lowest paid group. Cedar Rapids is doing some really good things in trying to start a paraeducator to teacher pathway program with the University of Dubuque, which Superintendent Bush can share more information about if she hasn't already, as well as working with CREA and CROTA to create a para-mentoring program, which these are all positive steps and good things to help grow employee skill levels, which in turn helps our students. But we need action now on increasing para wages. With 64 current para positions posted, that is a lot of student needs going unmet. Cedar Rapids needs to increase the starting wage as well as all para wages on the salary schedule in order to attract and retain quality paraeducators. The last I knew, roughly half of, or a little over half, are making less than $15 an hour now, with quite a few just barely above that. Please make raising paraeducator salaries in Cedar Rapids a priority. Please feel free to reach out to CROTA with any questions or any clarifications. I'm not sure that $15 an hour starting wage will even do it now, but it would be a move in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Danny Levy, if you would please step to the podium. Danny is here to speak about SROs and a student's response to Mr. McGarvey's presentation from our last board meeting.
Hello, my name is Danny Levy. My address is 1351 21st Avenue Southwest, 5244 here in Cedar Rapids. I am a senior at Washington High School this year. Today was my first day back after 18 months gone. It was fantastic. I've missed the school. This meeting has been on my mind this entire day, simply because of the fact that I've always been keenly aware of the impact SROs have had on our black students. As a black person myself, but most specifically as somebody who is light-skinned, I have noticed throughout all of my years the disproportionate mistreating of black men, especially in our schools. It is honestly mind-boggling when you grew up in a black community to not understand why somebody is getting mistreated simply for what they look like. I have never had a close relationship with any of our SROs. Frankly, if I'll be honest with you, any SRO in Washington High School I've never seen have any close relationship with any of our students. I was present the day, I believe it was February 14th, of the biggest fight there. 2 years ago, back in 2020, right before we all were forced out. I can promise you there was no SROs present during that fight. As a matter of fact, only the paras were the ones getting jumped for probably the first 10 minutes of the entire fight before it eventually got broken up by police presence. When I say that the scariest thing is a fully clothed officer in a space where you're supposed to just be learning, you're not supposed to fear for your own safety. But that is on the back of everybody's minds when you are a person of color. As unfortunate as it is, that type of fear should not be brought into the school setting. I would also like to mention that in the last presentation of Mr. McGarvey, he mentioned the fact that SROs are arresting at the same rate of regular officers. There are 16,000 students in the CRSD school system. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but when I say that 20%, that's how much SROs make up when they make arrests. That is an insane number. I don't understand how students, children, are getting arrested for things like that. Often, constantly. It's almost scary, the type of, resentment, anger that is seen towards literal children in order to give them a record that will follow them throughout their entire professional career. It is not something that will simply disappear, which is another thing that I have to mention. In Mr. McGarvey's last presentation, he said that he disproved the school-to-prison pipeline simply because this was something that won't follow them, knowing well that it would. I am not saying that SROs are a bad idea. The safety of students are overly important, and at the end of the day, is something that we need. However, both my parents are social workers, and I can promise you that they have done far more for children without a gun strapped to their hip. It's terrifying. It's honestly very, very scary to make eye contact with somebody who can kill you. And I don't ever wish that upon anybody else who doesn't have to have it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Amy Gardner. Amy is here to speak about the SRO in schools.
I'm going to say my address is 620 10th Street, Southeast Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I'm a McKinley person. Dear Cedar Rapids School Board, thank you for having me this evening. I am here because I'm concerned about the decision that removed our SRO from McKinley. Our district says it places an emphasis on building community and relationships, and then abruptly ended our working relationship with our SRO. I personally don't feel this is doing what's best for our school, our students, or our community. Anne is a positive, supportive part of our McKinley community, and our students benefited by having her in the building. Every single day, she showed our students the outstanding person that she is and made positive relationships with students, family, and staff. Anne did this in so many ways, including but not limited to serving breakfasts and lunches to our students, greeting them at the doors in the mornings and between classes, helping with projects, recesses, and special events. Beyond the daily positive interactions with our students, Anne went above and beyond for our school and our community. It was Anne who asked for the funds and created the emergency buckets we have in each classroom to use for emergencies and lockdowns. She was the one who started and led our popular forensics club that was enjoyed by many students at our school and allowed our students to learn about how things work in the police department, including a field trip to the police department at the end of the course. She set up and facilitated a self-defense class for staff who wanted to have some extra knowledge and skills. As a librarian, I really appreciate the support she provided with filing police reports and getting information when Chromebooks were stolen and the paperwork needed to be filled out for the district to replace the items. As of right now, librarians and technology staff do not have that contact person or a new procedure to get that information for the required paperwork for insurance purposes and replacement. These are just some of the many, many ways that our SRO has made a positive impact at McKinley and builds positive relationships with our students and community. I want our students to have opportunities for those positive interactions to draw upon if future interactions with law enforcement do occur. Without Anne in the building helping, serving food, greeting, getting to know our kids one-on-one, this won't happen. Please reconsider and allow our SRO back at McKinley. She is a valuable part of our McKinley family. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Bernard Clayton. Bernard is here to speak about the School Resource Officer Program.
Good evening. I'm Bernard Clayton. I live at 1604 6th Avenue Southeast. And what I'm hoping generally, organizations like this look for verification rather than collaboration with citizens. And I hope that whatever y'all produce this evening, that it will reflect listening to your students as well as the community. Now, there's a few things I'd like to emphasize. It's one thing that needs to be told to students that police officers can legally lie to them. That needs to be, and also their basic constitutional rights while they are in school. And the next thing that I would suggest, the school to prison pipeline that people say don't exist, which anecdotally in my mind it does say, I hope that the school board will commission a study from a nonpartisan person to do a study to see whether that's true or not. And also, it was asked of the school board to find out why did school resource officers first start at Jefferson High School, and also why did school resource officers be added at McKinley and Roosevelt schools first, with notes where they had the highest black population. And also, I'm a strongly suggest that a diversion program not be operated in the Cedar Rapids School District by the police department. If anyone should do that, it should be the court system. And also, another question we have to ask ourselves, is the school district abrogating its right as a disciplinarian? Or these students that y'all don't want to be bothered with, so you give them to the police, which I call them janitors with billy clubs. But that's why I refer to police as. And no offense. And then I want to finish with this. I just happen to be a member of the NAACP, and we had a meeting about 20 years ago. And one of the questions I always asked about school or about police officers in school, clearly define what their mission is there so there's no second guessing of what they do. We had a meeting 20 years ago with the state conference of NAACP. That meeting went on about 4 hours just on that particular issue. It ended up getting tabled. And by the way, one of the officers that brought, we got our personal stories about particular officers that we love, nothing wrong with it. And this was about a particular gentleman who was also at Roosevelt, I think Roosevelt Junior High in Des Moines. He is now a lieutenant on the Des Moines Police Department and is a member of Noble. And this so happened this year, I was on a call with him, and he talked about all the wonderful work he did as a police officer. And he talked about his SOR work, school resource officer work. And I asked him one question. Was any of the things you did, and this was this sounds like a great guy. All I heard is a great guy. He did some ground breaking work. But I asked him one question. Were any things you did institutionalized? And guess what his answer was? No. So thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to see what you're going to roll out to us. But those need to be some serious considerations that we do. And also I'm going to mention that since you are paying half the police officer's salary and you are signing off on some of the rest, you will be legally obligated in a lawsuit if anything goes wrong. Now, there's a lot, and I speak beyond my expertise, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm sure there's plenty of lawyers out there that be able to figure it out. So the school district, for any misconduct by an officer, y'all will at least be 50% responsible for it. I appreciate your time, and thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Allison Heffern. Allison is here to speak about the SRO program.
Good evening. My name is Allison Heffern. I live at 2619 Iris Avenue Northwest. I have been following a little bit of the evaluation and the debate with regard to the SRO programs in our schools. And every time I read an article, I think to myself, how did we ever get to a point where we thought having a constant police presence around our children is a good idea? And as I've followed the newspaper articles, it sounds to me like one of the biggest reasons is because there was a determination made that having an SRO in the school would increase the safety of our children. However, that leads me to the question of, if that is true, why don't we have an SRO at Harding and all the other schools? I then look to some of the research that's available with regard to SROs and the correlation between increasing safety in our schools. And I think the research clearly shows that there is no correlation. Our schools with SRO officers are not safer. There's no research that supports a conclusion that crime has gone down where SRO officers are present. In fact, there are more arrests in the schools where an SRO officer is present. There is simply no evidence that even the presence of an SRO officer serves as a deterrence to crime. The other explanation that I've heard about why we have SROs in our schools is to do some relationship building between our police department and our students. I would submit that the best way for the police department to build good relationships with everybody in the community is how they do their policing day in and day out on their beats. I think if the goal is for police officers to build relationships, the set task force data that's available indicates that that goal is not being met. Children who were interviewed did not feel that they had a better relationship with the police officer. I also am concerned that it sends sort of a mixed message to our children. Is the police officer a police officer? Is the police officer a counselor? Do the children know that if they tell something to the police officer, that can be used against them, or it can be used against their friends? Do they understand the distinction between a counselor and a police officer? I'm worried that the presence of the SRO is criminalizing sort of ordinary bad behavior by our students. I understand that most of the arrests have to do with simple misdemeanors. That means that there's been no injury. That means there's been no weapon. That means there's been no sale of drugs. So these are sort of low-level infractions that probably 20 years ago would have got you sent to the principal's office, not to the police department. However, I'm mostly concerned about the unintended consequence to our students of color. The data says that between 2015 and 2020, complaints against black students increased by 50%, while complaints against white students decreased by 6.1%. I understand the Cedar Rapids Police Department explains this disparity by essentially saying black students misbehave more than white students. I don't think that's a proposition we want to accept. The data does not support that explanation. The research shows that white students and students of color misbehave at the same rate when we're talking about simple misdemeanors. I would ask that the board evaluate the limited data against the negative impacts against our students, particularly our students of color. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kevin Weimore. Kevin is here to talk about SROs. Following Kevin will be Jenny Schultz.
Excuse me. I'm fully vaccinated, so I'm going to take off my mask here only. I'm Kevin Weimore. I'm living at 4501 Pineview Drive, Northeast. I would like to speak strongly in support of keeping the school-based police officers in the Cedar Rapids Public Schools for the current school years and beyond. Their role is especially crucial in the wake of the multiple fatality shooting deaths in Cedar Rapids, not far from my home and from John F. Kennedy High School. For me, it's a question of overwhelming support in favor of keeping the cops in the schools. 75% support from the community in the district's own survey this summer. 72% support from the students at a previous district survey, I believe it was last May. And in that survey, it said that only 19 total students feel very unwelcome because of the school-based cops. So I'm struggling to understand the negativity. And at a previous meeting, I guess, earlier in the summer, one board member said, well, this is not necessarily a majority rules situation. Well, if such overwhelming support in favor of the police is not a majority rules situation, what indeed is? So it's a question for me of making policy in favor of the common good. It seems like it's terribly unwise to let a handful of teenagers' opinions especially outweigh the demonstrated will of the people. That's true in light especially of this summer's mass fatality in Cedar Rapids. What will we say? What will the school board say if indeed someone, after removing the police, what will we say if someone enters the building and shoots the place up? And further, I'm having difficulty understanding the situation regarding, I was told that 2 of the middle school SROs have already been removed. And how can this be if the contract has not been changed? So I would find that highly questionable at best, and I hope your subsequent discussion will indeed clarify this. Thank you very much.
Jenny Schultz is next, and she's here to speak about SROs. Following Jenny will be Miranda Cornell.
Good evening. I'd like to start by saying that I hold the police in high esteem. I have a lot of admiration for Chief German and for Lieutenant McGarvey. I'm not here because I'm against the police. I'm here because I'm for kids. The question is not about whether any individual SRO's individual performance has been good, or what people's individual perceptions and beliefs are about police officers in schools. The question is whether this is a good structure to have in our schools. And after doing countless numbers of hours of research and reviewing peer journals and studies and research on police, I've learned that it is not a good structure to have in schools. Kids should not be policed while they are trying to learn. All children misbehave. All adults misbehave. At a school, our responsibility is to teach kids how to do better. Our excellent teachers and school administrators can handle student misbehavior. They do that every day in schools that have SROs and in the 4 middle schools that do not have SROs. They sense when students are having a hard time and they get them the help that they need. But when an officer is at a school, it makes it much easier for staff or administration to request their involvement. And having police at schools increases student arrests. We know that from the data. And as we saw from the data, the vast majority of criminal complaints in the Cedar Rapids School District are simple misdemeanors like disorderly conduct. Arresting kids does not teach them. If arresting people help them learn from their mistakes, then we as the country that imprisons more people than any country in the history of the world would have the lowest crime rate, but we do not. If a student is arrested at school, they are less likely to want to return to school. Just think about that, the place where they were arrested. As one Kennedy student told me, she's never seen a student return to school after being arrested. Kids who are arrested are then more likely to drop out. And then when they drop out of school, they're less able to obtain legitimate employment, and they're more likely to engage in crime. Increasing arrests in schools would by itself be a reason not to have police in schools. But then there's the local data, and you've reviewed it. The number of children arrested at school each year, the low number, remarkably low number of kids who were eligible or given diversions, and the disparate arrest rates for Black kids, more than 6 times the rate of white children. The crux of this issue is whether we believe that Black children are more misbehaved than white children. The good news is we don't have to rely on our own theories or perceptions. This issue has been studied and there are confirmed findings. Black youth and white youth misbehave at the same rates. They are roughly as likely to get into fights, carry weapons, steal property, use and sell drugs, and skip school. So unless we believe that Cedar Rapids is somehow not like anywhere else in America, that we are so different that the national data does not apply here, we have to accept that our school arrest rates are not just disparate, they are inequitable. You can't do anything about adults being arrested at inequitable rates, but you can do something about the fact that children are being arrested at inequitable rates in school. Equity is a value for the school district, and this is an opportunity to embrace it. Thank you.
Miranda Cornell is next, and she's here to speak about para pay and responsibilities at the Transition Center role.
Hello, my name is Miranda Cornell. I have many roles in the Cedar Rapids School District. I'm currently a teacher at the Transition Center, which many of you probably don't know what that is, but I'll explain that soon. I'm also a parent. I've worked as a para. I did my student teaching in English language arts at Jefferson High School when I was at Mount Mercy College. It's now a university. It was a few years back. And I also have worked in severe disabilities, and I'm currently a teacher at Transition Center. Transition Center is a work experience program for students with autism and intellectual disabilities mostly. We also have had students from Polk Elementary with behavior disorders and mental health issues. And what we try to do is they're able to get educated till they're 21 because they have an IEP. So we try to figure out what their niche is, their interests, so that they can have work experience, so that they can get a job, not only a job, but also a career with longevity. We have many business partners in Cedar Rapids, and part of the reason I'd like to talk to tonight is because many people don't know what the Transition Center is. And I'd also like to talk about the importance of paras to the success of the Transition Center and how the recent cuts, due to lack of pay, have affected my program directly. Last year I had 6 paras. This year I have 3. Last year I had 21 students. This year I have 17. I lost 4 students. I lost 3 adults. Actually, my students are young adults. I lost 3 staff. I'm also a work experience coordinator. I have an endorsement in work experience, so I'm a parent. I'm an English teacher. I'm a special ed teacher. I've been a para, and I'm also a work experience coordinator. As a para, I learned how important paras are to supporting special education. At the Transition Center, we go out in the community all day long. We ride the city bus to work sites. Our aim is to provide individualized instruction with small groups and also to increase students' stamina. Due to the bus routes in Cedar Rapids City Bus, many of our work sites are limited to 50 minutes. So if you have 2 students or even 3, the amount of work divided in that 50 minutes is not teaching a student truly even what an actual work day is like. Many of our students, we hope to have enough independence that they can work by themselves 3 or 4 hours a day, a few days a week, which helps them find a place in their community and makes them successful in their adult life, which is the whole point. We also help kids get on ID waivers so that they can get adult services, which is me and the other teacher, David Kelly's, main job. When we've been cut from 6 to 3 paras, me and David Kelly are no longer just teachers and work experience coordinators. We're going to have to work as paras because we have 17 students that in their IEPs, their para support is 1 para to 3 students. I have 3 paras. Divide 17 by 3. How many students is that? Is it 3 to 1? Certainly isn't. Meanwhile, these paras aren't in a sustained classroom. We are out in the community, going to work sites, trying to provide individualized instruction. 3 of my paras that were cut were asked to be job coaches. One worked summer school this year that was limited at $15 an hour. That was a pay raise for her. I had another para that's been in the district for 20 years, and she worked summer school, got paid $15 an hour. I understand it's out of a different fund, but the point is, my paras have so many responsibility. They administer medication. They take kids out that have seizures. They have kids that are flight risks out in the community at work sites, and I don't know how to legally send out kids in groups at the right ratio because they stole 3 of my paras to fill and I understand those positions need filled, but if you would increase the para wages, you would keep the paras that you have. I had 1 para that was in the district for 10 years and she'd worked at the Transition Center the entire time. They were going to force her to go to some school and a behavior program. She doesn't want to do that. That's out of her skill set. She resigned. This district lost a fantastic para because they were going to force her to do something she didn't want to do.
Excuse me,
And
Ms.
all
Heffern,
she'd
your
done
time is up. Thank
is
you.
be a good para.
Our next speaker is Kristen Barber. She's here to speak about SROs.
Good evening. My name's Kristen Barber, 1307 3rd Avenue Southwest. I've never done anything like this, so I'm just speaking from my heart. So forgive me if I'm just kind of, you hear breathing a lot up here. But the reason why I'm here is I work at Metro High School. My experience with our SRO has been a positive one. I have 2 young black men that attend Washington High School, one that just started this year as a freshman. And his experience at McKinley with his SRO was a good experience. But just because I've had good experience and my children have had good experiences doesn't mean that there aren't barriers out there. I feel as though there should be some type of solution or strategies. I feel there are good SROs out there that are doing their job in building those relationships with the children as well as with the community. I feel as though as a district, that's what we stand for. When I send my kids off to school or when I step into Metro, I want to feel safe. I want to be safe. I want my children to be safe. And I understand that there are SROs that may have a difficult time communicating because of cultural differences, may lack education of how to deal with cultural diversity. I feel like there should be some type of training, some type of strategies to build those cultural differences and how to approach and communicate with those that may not look like them. I don't feel like we should completely just get rid of them. I feel like there are SROs out there that are doing their job. I feel like it's really important to get the right ones into these buildings. I don't feel as though it's right to single out certain schools where they don't have SROs in place. I know we've all experienced or seen on television when it comes to school shootings, and they're not necessarily in inner cities where these are happening. I don't want to single out those schools that that have more blacks or more Latinos in those schools, and those are the schools that have SROs in those buildings. I feel like all kids have issues, whether they're white or black. I feel like all schools need to be safe, and parents and staff need to feel safe in those schools. So if you're gonna place SROs into schools, I feel like they need to be placed in all schools, to not single those particular schools out because they may have more of a diverse demographic area, or the ratio the ratio from students to staff, which is an issue that we clearly have in our district. And as a district, we have tried to come up with solutions to fix that. We don't always have teachers or staff members that can relate to cultural differences. And as a district, we've come up with IDI. We've had coaching, equity training into our buildings, and there needs to be something incorporated with these SROs to continue to build relationships with students. And when you build relationships with these students, I feel as though you build relationships within the community. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Clint Tweet Ball, and Clint is here to talk about school resource officers. Following Clint will be Lawrence Winkowski.
Good evening, CRSD school board members and staff. I want to take a few moments to talk about SROs. First, I want to say thank you to our SRO officers and to our police force in general. Just within the last week, I was called to be a support in a difficult interpersonal situation, and the police that responded were amazing and caring professionals that gave this family great support during a stressful time. This is one of the many, many times where I've seen our police force act with grace and care in a challenging situation. I appreciate you. As a parent of two children who have both attended Cedar Rapids schools from kindergarten through 12th grade, and with a senior at Washington High School, I want to say that we have incredible schools and staff in Cedar Rapids. The Cedar Rapids public school system has served my children and family well, launching our kids into the academic realm in a way that gives me confidence that they can compete with anyone. It's been important to me that my kids feel safe, academically challenged, and a part of a community of diversity and mutual support, and they have. I won't say that there have never been any scary incidents or that my kids haven't been exposed to things I would have preferred that they be able to avoid, but that is life, I'd rather have them experience the real world now when I am around to support them than later in their own life. I think everyone here has the same goal and is supportive of the shared district purpose of providing a safe, supportive, collaborative culture. The question is, how do we best do this? It feels to me like at some point along the way, we stumbled into deciding that a good way to promote safety was through school resource officers program. And even though there has been overwhelming data to show that it is not working, and it is in fact discriminatory, we're not really putting our full effort into developing the model alternative program our students deserve. If you'll indulge me for a moment, I want to get a little bit personal on this. Like a lot of kids, I made stupid choices when I was young. Those choices ended up getting me involved in the correctional system. I quickly realized that the correctional system saw me as a bad person that needed to be punished for my mistakes. The systemic response was to tell me all my problems, make me pay restitution, do community service, and put barriers in my path to make life more challenging. Most of the people I worked with while engaged with the correctional system assumed that there was something bad about me, that I was an addict or from an unstable family or somehow deeply flawed. Why did the system do this? Because this is what corrections is designed to do. It's the name. Find the flaw, correct the individual, fix what is broken within them. Fortunately, I had more than the correctional system in my life. I had a solid family with parents who saw me as gifted and talented. I had a faith community that believed in me. I had people who looked at me not as a problem, but as a person full of potential who needed a little extra support. Why did they support me? Because family, social support systems, faith communities, this is what they are designed to do. They are designed to look at individuals and see their giftedness, believe in them, support them. Their weapons are love. Now, as an adult, I've had a chance to see how this plays out with youth from a wide variety of backgrounds. I've seen the difference between correcting someone and believing in someone. I've seen kids that came in contact with the justice system and were absolutely beaten down and hardened. I've seen kids come in contact with educational and social and emotional support systems where they softened, changed, and opened up to new possibilities for their future. School board members, this is an issue you need to be engaged on. You need to drive a policy forward that is going to bring about a culture where every student is given the best opportunity possible to reach their full potential. It may be hard, it may require extra thought and work, but I believe in you. I believe you'll do what is best to give all kids an opportunity to overcome the challenges they face and to avoid being part of the correctional system if at all possible. Thank you.
Lawrence Winklowski is next. He's here to speak about the SRO program, and following Lawrence will be Anthony Arrington.
Lawrence Winklowski, 4234 Morel Road. I'm going to start off with something that I was going to put at my bottom of my comments, and that is people talk about data. People talk about their experiences in high school and school and that. Those were different times. Data comes from different communities. People bring into our meetings and into our community things that have happened other places which are not relevant. And, you know, people have to defend it. Most of the data and research come from a bunch of liberal universities. They don't come from people who are moderate. I mean, they come from Berkeley or Iowa, and I'll say that because my kids go to both, and that, but they, you know, so we have to look at where is the data coming from, because as a person with a math major, I can take any group data and make it look a particular way to appease a particular audience that you would want to appease. And that, but I do respect people who care about other communities. But if you care about other communities, take our students, let's educate them and be good people so they can go out and take care of those communities after we take care of our own community. I guess I'll go with, each business entity, whether it's in it, sort of like family. We're a family as a community. We love and respect each other. We care, we fight, and that. But, one of the things that happens is that we don't provide hard and tough love to people. We don't support the truth, but we support an individual. The truth is more important than the individual. And we need to hold people responsible for their actions. And the problem I have we talk about SROs, all we talk about is students. We need to hold everybody in the process accountable. Because unfortunately, there's bad actors in our school district. I've experienced them. I've experienced some unfortunate situations with our police department. But I will also say in both cases, I've experienced some extremely good situations. So that's something we need to look at. We need also, as I've previously mentioned at in the board, we need to hold the same standards for teachers as we do for students. If we have drug dogs going through the hallways of our schools, they need to be going through the parking lots of every facility in our school district, because I'm sorry, I'm not that naive to believe that we don't have some teachers who occasionally partake. And that after a hard day at school, I could see that. Back, and I'm sure someone here remembers, at the March 10th of 2008 meeting, I presented the board with a litmus test to determine if a policy is fair and equitable. The test is a given policy would always be implemented the same at any school within the school district, no matter who was implementing this. And I got this from the auditor of the state's office, who's an independent organization that cares about accountability to its citizens. This statement needs to be applied to whatever we come up with for SROs, and it needs to be applied to basically every policy that we pass in this school board. And that another thing that we do, and we support all these organizations like the Junior Cougars and all that, but you know what they do? They demoralize kids in some respects. You get a 7 or 8 year old kid trying out for a baseball team or a sports team, and they come back and say, sorry, you're not good enough. How does that help the kid be a better student or person? And that we got to stop that. These people, if we're going to give them our resources, they got to provide a little bit more for all the students. And that. So anyway, that is, we'll leave it at that for tonight. Thank you.
Anthony Arrington is here this evening to speak about SROs. Following Anthony will be Harold Wall. I'm sorry, I can't read the writing very well. Waldea, thank you.
Take my mask off. Anthony Arrington, 1311 34th Street Southeast. I'm here representing myself as a community member and advocates for social justice. I don't know if it was a coincidence that I went after this gentleman again, but I believe the last time I was here, I went after this gentleman. So I'll say again what I said last time to this gentleman and to the rest of you. Unless your skin looks like mine, unless you've been through the experiences that we've seen in our communities, you don't get it. You don't get it. And you're not listening. And this isn't a liberal conversation. This isn't a conservative conversation. This is a conversation about kids. I haven't heard one thing today, one thing that our SROs do that a trained therapist couldn't do, that a trained counselor that spends their entire career doing. Relationship building, they're trained to do that. Working with children, they spend their entire careers in academia and they get degrees to do that. I would like one SRO to tell me when you thought about being a police officer and you grew up, was your idea of being a police officer to go parade schools with guns? Was it? I don't know a single police officer who dreams about parading schools, keeping an eye on children for their career. If that was the case, they could have done something else. To the resident who used shootings to justify SROs, we get shootings everywhere. Did those shootings happen on campus? Just curious. Because are we blaming the kids on campus for something that happened in the community? So I'm just curious. I just want to make sure we understand this. What's the only difference between an SRO and a counselor and a therapist? If we assume that they do the same work. The difference is one carries a gun and a badge and was trained to stop crime, and the other was trained to deal with children. Purely. To the SROs, and I want to point out, Jess, I met you the last time I was here, never even knew you, but I heard so much good stuff about you. Me and you stood in the hallway and we had hugs. Because I think you all are good people. I don't know you. This has nothing to do with you. In fact, I feel sorry for you all that you're put in this position because you're good people. But you didn't grow up to watch high school students and middle school students. I know you did, and if you did, maybe you should think about another career. Maybe you should be a social worker, or a counselor, or a therapist because you're really good at it. But you were trained to be a police officer. As far as I'm concerned, they're being put in the middle of something they shouldn't be in because that's not what they were hired to do. $1.6 million of our money is being spent in this community, of which half is coming from the district to support the SROs. We have nothing to show for it except increased arrests, increased crimes of people that have brown skin like me. And I'm told that we're behavior problems. None of these people that are saying this have the skills, the experience to truly understand the backstory of those individuals. You arrest them because of behavior. But I always say this, and I said it before and I'll say it again. Root cause, root cause, root cause. Root cause, root cause, root cause. Do we understand why those students behave the way they do? Police officers aren't trained to deal with that. Therapists are. Teachers are. SROs are taking $1.6 million from others who can do better, from others who we can spend this money on, for programs that we could spend this money on. More therapists. Pay those paras who understand the communities. More cultural competency training. And not just training, but education, because I can train dogs. You have to educate people. And there is a difference. So if there's a concern about potential crime and other concern that there's safety because police officers are in our buildings, park them down the street. I see police officers sitting in parking lots all the time waiting for me to speed by or catch me if I'm drunk, and they can respond in minutes. Park them down the street. They don't need to be walking the schools.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Harold Waliwa, and following he will be Andrea Lorenz Norris. I apologize if I got your name wrong again.
No worries. Good afternoon. My name is Harold Walewa. I live at 2407 Buckingham Drive Northwest. I'm a senior at Coe College. I'm double majoring in African American Studies, Social and Criminal Justice with a minor in History, as well as I am the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee on the Student Senate. I'm here today to talk about SROs, a topic that is often talked about in the classroom, especially in the Social and Criminal Justice Department. I mean, we've heard today countless about the data trends that always lead towards disproportionate effects of arrests and negative impacts on students of color. I think it's important that while we're here gathered in this room and as we go back home and think about our day, I think people should take the time to understand that it's okay that someone has a different perspective than you. It's okay that people experience life differently than you. And it's okay to admit that when a program is failing our kids. I think that, I mean, for myself, 4 years out of high school, I had an SRO in my high school. It did not make me feel safer, did not intervene, unlike the other staff that was there when it came to fights or disruptiveness. I think it's appalling to hear that a lot of our high school students and some of our middle school students are being arrested and being charged with misdemeanors at this age. I think we should all take a good long look at ourselves in the mirror and really think about the experience that these kids are having and think about what the point of school and education is for. It's to build up our students to become the future leaders of this city, this state, this country, and not to demonize them, make them feel like they're being surveillanced 24/7 and under the guise of let's build community relationships. I think that it's also important to note that while this data shows the disproportionate effect of arrests and negative impacts on students of color, that there are good SROs, there are good police officers. I mean, my uncle is the captain of the Orange County Sheriff's Department in California. So I know for a fact there are good police officers. But we cannot allow that to overtake the fact of the matter that SROs in our school district are negatively impacting people of color. And unless you are a student at that school, unless you are a black or brown student at that school, why do you get to have so much power over what happens to them on their day-to-day basis? I mean, we had a high school student speak here already, talk about their experience with SROs and what they've seen. So why are we still having this conversation? Why are we still arguing when we have proof? If it's important enough for them to come to this meeting, it must be important. Because I know for a fact if I was in high school, I would not be trying to be in here. So with all that to say, I really do think that with listening to everybody's speeches and experiences on what has happened over the years with SROs, not only in Cedar Rapids, but across the country, while we look at the data, I think it's pretty clear and obvious what we need to do here. Thank you for your time.
Next up is Andrea Norris, and she's here to speak about the SRO presentation. Following her will be Kelly McMahon.
Hello, my name's Andrea Leverins Norris, and I live at 1844 2nd Avenue Southeast. I see a few friendly faces here that know me by first name, don't you? But I actually, before I get started, I want to apologize to Deputy Superintendent Quaker because we're all making statements and making assumptions before you've given your presentation. I did want to mention that I have read through your presentation. It was listed on the website before I came. And I just had a couple comments and one question for you. First I'll do the question. It does mention that SROs will be in soft clothes, and I'd like you, when you do your presentation, to mention if they will be armed, and if so, how exactly will they be armed? The other two comments I have, after reading the SRO presentation, I was wondering if any part of the rationale to maintain the SRO program is because of the survey respondents saying that SROs make them safer. Let me ask that question again. Is any portion of the reason to keep the SROs based on people saying that they feel safer? And if so, Since when do policy decisions get made on survey respondents reporting how they feel? My second comment is to the entire school board. I was going to name you each individually, but I'll spare it because we've all been here for a long time. But just pretend that I say each of your names as I go. I would just like to remind each and every one of you that the police are here to protect the public. Do they have to actually be in the building to do that? But more importantly, the question is, do we need to spend education dollars for that to happen? Thank you.
Kelly McMahon is next, and she's here to speak about SROs. Following Kelly will be Jamie Cummins.
Kelly McMahon, 5508 Dostal Drive, Southwest Cedar Rapids, 52404. And I'm going to apologize in advance of my ramblings this evening. I'm here because I do not support SROs in our schools. I'm speaking as an individual, and I'm going to be honest. I began my teaching career in Milwaukee, and I remember vividly when we would have police officers that are friendly partners, and there's nothing against police officers, it's not. I value the work that you do. But they'd come and do searches of our kids' backpacks because we were a 4-year-old kindergarten through 8th grade building. And I can tell you on those particular days, I did not feel safe. Because growing up, I was told if there is a police presence, that means something is not safe. To this day, I do not feel safe when I see large numbers of police officers around. And I do not feel safe even when, I'm gonna say it, the police pal comes into my classroom because there's a gun on them or a taser on them. I don't feel safe in those surroundings. And I'm a grown woman who has never had any experiences with the police officers in any type of situation other than responding to when my apartment was broken into in Milwaukee, which was a very positive, helpful way. But that's just how I feel, because that was the message I grew up with. Brain research shows that humans do not make consistent, responsible decisions until age 28. Research also shows that the prison to school pipeline begins in preschool. It is the way that we decide how we're going to discipline and handle children's behavior, when it is expected and when it's unexpected. And as a teacher of young children, I can say I am guilty of feeding that school to prison pipeline. In my early career years, I did not know what I was doing and how I was harming my children, my students of color. But I did great harm. And as I have learned more, because yes, education is key, and I've learned about my implicit biases and the way that the consequences I was choosing to do was causing harm, I have changed the ways I teach. I also have learned a lot about the importance of restorative practices. Having those conversations to repair the harm when an unexpected behavior happens, whether it's between student and student, or student and adult, or even adult and adult. I cannot tell you how awesome it is to see my kindergartners take the leadership and using their iMessages to have conversations, to solve problems. They're not going to, those are skills that they need to have at a young age. And that's part of this problem. SROs are in the middle, as someone had said, of a really bad situation. Because the situation is we have developmentally inappropriate structures and place in our school district. And it's not just us, it's across the entire country. Because we don't spend time dealing with the social and emotional learning and giving children what they need at a young age and all the way through high school. I'm sorry, SROs cannot do that. We need to have developmentally appropriate practices and structures in place in the elementary level. Middle school, high school, we need more people like our Kids First program that are in and teaching and helping children have those restorative conversations with each other and with adults. We need to put our investments where we can do the greatest good for our children. And I'm sorry, as much as I value the work of the police officers in this community, that is not having someone in my school, well, fortunately I'm not in my school, but in a different school, turning that building into an institution where crime is always looked at. Looking how do we punish children versus how do we lift them up and give them the skills that they need in order to solve problems in a healthy, productive manner. People do things out of desperation. And I cringe every time when the police pal comes into my classroom and tell my students, well, so-and-so did this, so that makes them a bad person. No, so-and-so did this because they made a sad choice and they were desperate. I'm tired of having my students hear that someone in their family or someone that they know that's a neighbor that has been in jail is a bad person, because they're not. People make sad choices out of desperation, and we need to honor that. So when I say this starts in preschool, it does. The wording that we are using when we have police officers come into our elementary schools does harm too. I'm not saying we end that program, because we don't. It's a very valuable program. They teach them amazing things. But we have to think about what is best for our children. And we need to be investing in therapists, social workers, counselors, teachers, nurses, paras, people who provide amazing restorative practice training. We need to be investing in our education of our staff, helping us realize our own implicit biases and the ways that we are feeding that school to prison pipeline. Because I still, to this day, am guilty of it. I'm working on it, but I know I am still guilty of it. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Jamie Cummins. Jamie's here to speak out about SROs.
Hi, I'm Jamie Cummins, 7007 Deerhorn Trail Northeast. I am an alumni of the Cedar Rapids Community School District. I am a parent of the Cedar Rapids Community School District, and I'm an employee of the Cedar Rapids Community School District. So I do have to say this is my first time speaking at a board meeting. I'm a little nervous about it. I also showed up with no typed message, so just note that it was the educator who showed up ill-prepared. I have been in education for 23 years. I'm a guidance counselor at Jefferson High School. I've been at Jefferson this is my 13th year at Jefferson, my 23rd year in education. I've worked in diverse settings my entire career. I hear our students of color. I see our students of color. I cannot understand and I cannot relate to their experience because it hasn't been mine. But I listen and I try to learn and I try to take that into what I do every day and how I interact with kids. One of the things that I think frustrates me about this whole conversation is that our systemic disparities with children of color go well beyond the number of suspensions, the number of arrests, we're talking about levels of math, we're talking about reading levels, graduation rate. It is a systemic tragedy that needs to be addressed on all sorts of levels. And it isn't unique to Cedar Rapids, it's a worldwide pandemic. It's a United States issue. But right now I feel like we're picking at things that aren't gonna solve the bigger issue. And we tend to sort of try things and then move them along instead of fix them. And so in my experience at Jefferson in particular, Jennifer Roberts, Janae Obank, Tracy Johnson, Drew Tran, John McDowell, we've had 5 SROs since I've been in there, and every single one of them has been phenomenal. And the relationships that they have had with students, I can't begin to explain. You have to see it for yourself. I could talk for hours about all the consultations. I would call them into my office and we'd talk to kids. Their life experiences help my students. Knowing where Drew Tran grew up and what he did with his life and how he made changes and what he does now, he talks to my kids who've had similar experiences in a way that I can't, and that's very effective. They come in and kids want to ask legal questions, they want to ask for guidance. They're there as a resource for them in building those relationships. Day in, day out. They're in the hallway, they're in the cafeteria. I have yet to meet an SRO who is there to look to get kids in trouble. They're not there to police and find fault and find criminal activity. They're there to help teach them and encourage them to get through education. Do they have a job to do when it comes to large fights or things like that? Yes, but I'm a trained counselor. I don't want to police. I didn't go into education to police. When they talked about allowing educators to take guns into their classrooms and their offices, I thought, oh my gosh, that's not the career for me. I'm not trained to do that. So do I want guns in our building? No. But I will tell you on the day that there was one at Jefferson, which was one of the darkest days in my career, I looked up and I saw Janae Rubino Obank. She wasn't our SRO at that time, she was at Prairie, but she came over on the call because we were still her home. And when I looked up, I knew, I get little goosebumps and emotional. When I looked up and saw her, I knew that she had the best interests of our building and our staff and our students. I had a student whose father passed away and she found him that morning. I got a call through one SRO, called my principal, who said they were trying to find me to get to the student. I got to the student within 20 minutes on a Saturday morning in the middle of August. And the next person to show up was Drew Tran. Not because I called him, but because he heard it on the radio and he knew it was one of our students, and he was there. So please understand that these SROs, at least in my experience, go above and beyond what it means to be a police officer. They are not there, I don't know, I can't speak for them, but I've never seen them operate in a way where they act like police. They're not in there to police, they're in there to build those relationships. I know our SROs are willing to listen and willing to learn. They don't set out to make kids feel uncomfortable, and they would be part of those conversations in my experience and be part of the solution. So I'm hoping that you will all look at the fact that not every SRO is the same in every building in the district, and we've had some very phenomenal SROs that have done really good work. I can only speak to those that I've worked with, and I would love to see us setting the stage for the rest of the community, because schools are a reflection of our society. So when we make change, we can also make change in our community and empower our kids to be advocates for themselves and others. So, thank you.
Next is Devadrian Wright. He's here to speak about officers. Selena Watkins will be up next.
Devondrian Wright, engagement specialist at Washington High School. I have a social work background, graduated from University of Iowa School of Social Work. I just mentioned that because we do a lot of de-escalation. We do a lot of restorative. We have conversations with groups that are at each other at Washington High School. Does racism exist? Yes, it does. Are certain people biased against other groups? That is true. But I've been in situations where I don't want to go check this kid's backpack because we know he's got a gun. And so we had to call the officer to go check that out. And he had a gun, right? Situations where certain groups come up to Washington High School, and I'm pretty sure people who go to Wash know, very small percentage, there's 1,400 students at Washington High School, but there's a small percentage that are in gangs. There's 3 gangs of boys out there, and there's 2 gangs of girls, and they're at each other. Many times, it doesn't happen at school because the officer's in the hallway. And they've told me personally, I'm not going to do it in school. Why? What's the problem? The officer's in the hallway. Again, I am not saying officers are perfect. Myself, if I'm pulled over as an African-American male, I am nervous. That's true. But I will say, I've been in a lot of meetings, again, as an engagement specialist, where we're investigating someone with a weapon or someone coming up to do harm. And I'm not saying we can't do the job, but it would be very difficult to do the job without an officer. And I've never seen, like, I'm only speaking from my own personal experience. I'm not speaking for other people. I've never seen someone arrested if it wasn't an assault, like some kid was jumped and kicked in the mouth or concussion, right? Or gun, knife, weapon. Again, I would like to open the dialogue with anyone, because there's pros and cons to everything, right? But again, I would encourage people to come out and walk the halls of Washington High School and just be present and see what the SRO, I can only speak for the SRO. I worked at Polk for a while and Washington High School. I can only speak for those 2. But I would encourage you to come see for yourself and see what they do and see their presence. And just for the record, Prairie also has an SRO, right? Many schools across the nation have an SRO. And God forbid there's a school shooter, because I don't want to deal with that either, you know? When it comes down to helping the students, many students report feeling safe. Again, I'm not speaking for all the students, because again, we had some accounts that said they're terrified of seeing an officer in a uniform standing in the hallway. But there are many students who are afraid of other students that are glad he's there. because some students, they don't care about anything except for charges. And it's sad. I'm not saying there's not work to be done there to get people to look beyond charges, but that is a deterrent for certain people to be violent. If I do this here, he's going to press charges against me. And I will say this, we have work to do with those students, right, to think higher and aim higher. But in the moment, I will take that. I'll take, hey, listen, they're not going to do it because they don't want charges, right? And I'm not speaking for the majority of Washington high school students. Many students are not in gangs. And I have seen officers in situations when they come from the outside. When they come from the outside, they don't know who's who. The officers in the buildings, they know kind of who's involved with what, right? And so if one student is walking by that's not affiliated with this group versus the one who's talking and threatening, familiarity, to be familiar with who's who and who's doing what, who could potentially have what. And again, I'd say I would like to open dialogue with anyone who would like to talk about these issues. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. And again, racism is real, but I would just say I would like to keep the SROs. That's it.
Our next speaker is Selena Watkins. Selena would like to speak with the board about SROs.
Good evening. My name is Selena Watkins at 505 First Street, Southwest, Cedar Rapids. I read an article that stated that blacks felt targeted, not safe, and scared when police officers are at school. And I'm not here to underestimate anyone else's personal experience. I'm here to share my own because I am also black and I also have a different experience. I went to Jefferson High School. I graduated in 2018. I had Officer Tracy Johnson and Officer Drew Tran as my school resource officers. Both officers were amazing. I had my fair share with police growing up. I know many people say that when a kid is arrested, they drop out and do those things, and I did not. I think those officers being there helped me, pushed me along, and helped me graduate and get to where I needed to be today. They helped change my impressions I had with officers I've already had when going into school. And I say that because I grew up in a single parent household. We didn't have a father, so there was days that I had questions that my dad wasn't there, so I had to ask Officer Drew Tran, who helped me as well. I told those officers that I wanted to become a police officer when I grew up, and they helped me get on the right track. They provided me with useful information, and they helped me get my foot in the door and become a police volunteer at the Cedar Rapids Police Department. When they were at school, whether it was in the halls, in the lunchroom, outside, or during the day, or at the end of the day, I felt safe. And I know some other students say they don't feel safe, but I knew that I had someone to talk to. I always had somebody to look up to. I had a role model, and I also had someone that I could depend on. I knew if something bad would happen, they would be there. And many people say, like, let's keep them out of the schools, and they can just come within minutes. I think, imagine being someone in a fight, and someone is sitting there bashing you, kicking you, hitting you, or whatever it is. Those officers could be there within minutes. Minutes could feel like a long time if you're getting beat up and hit on and kicked on. During my 4 years at Jefferson, I have personally witnessed these officers build relationships, help others, create bonds with many students, and that's of different colors, backgrounds, and life experiences. To me, it's a lot more than just about safety. I think teachers have someone they can lean on. I remember in school we were talking about search and seizures, and of course they're reading from a textbook. They were able to have Officer Drew come in and talk about more about the legal stuff that they didn't have the answers to. I think students also have someone they can look up to. Most importantly, parents should have someone they can trust and depend on. My main concern when it comes to taking officers out of school is not only the student safety, but staff safety. I remember one day at Jefferson, a teacher tried to break up a fight. That teacher had his coffee in his hand, and with that fight, he fell and then he broke his arm. Teachers aren't trained to break up fights and do things like that, even though I know they want to be there to keep the students safe as well. I don't think teachers should be responsible for risking their lives and breaking up fights. Again, minutes might seem like a short time, but it could be a long time and it could cost someone their life. We talk a lot about how the impact students or officers have on students. I know personally I've experienced nothing but good interactions. I'm also a Big Sisters, do a Big Girls Big Sisters program, and I have a youth minority, and when we first met, she told me that she did not like police officers. And she was 10 at the time when she said that, and it was pretty heartbreaking because that's pretty early to have that opinion. Now she goes to Prairie Middle School. She is 12, and she has Officer Wyatt there, and she loves him. She said that Officer Wyatt helped her with her homework, helped her write a paper, and then she told me the other day that she wanted to be a police officer. So they do have positive impacts, not only for myself, but for my little, which is also important. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kayla Panos Blackcloud. She would like to speak about the SRO.
Hello, my name is Kayla Panos Blackcloud. 2130 18th Street Southwest is my address. And excuse me for my broken jaw as I may slur. I met Officer Tran when I was a junior at Jefferson High School. At the time, I remember talking to him whenever I had a drama issue. He was there to de-escalate my emotions. I always saw him in the hallway smiling and vibing with all the kids, the troubled and the non-troubled. Everyone always created a great bond with him. He was always there with a smile on his face, and he was there to always greet you throughout the whole day. A couple of years ago, on May 18th, I had an event occur in my life that forever has affected me and many other people. There was many people that helped me that night. For those people, I'll forever be grateful. On that night, I also had someone by my side who knew me personally. As the paramedics pulled me out of the car and started working on me and performing CPR, Officer Tran was alongside the paramedics, urging me to keep fighting and not to give up. While Officer Tran was by my side, he noticed a lot of kids that he sees on an everyday basis. In the halls, they always have special bonds with him. Because Officer Tran had developed special bonds with these kids, he was able to keep many panicked and afraid kids under control and comfort them. It took me a while to recover, but when I was able to walk again, I made my way back home, and the first thing I wanted to do when I got home was to go give Officer Tran a hug and thank him. He has forever impacted me inside and outside of school since day one, and I will forever appreciate him and what he does inside and outside of school in the community. Thank you.
Our last speaker this evening is Jessica Bernhardt. Jessica is here to speak about SROs.
Good evening. I'm Jess Barnhart, 505 First Street Southwest. I'm the school resource officer at Polk Alternative Education Center. I was not going to talk tonight, and then just listening to everybody, I decided I'm going to, and I'll try to get through this without crying, so I apologize. And sorry, Chief. Been listening to a lot of folks tonight. I've been a police officer for 23 years. And if I'd have known I was going to speak tonight, I'd have worn my formal Yankees jersey instead of the pinstripe. Sorry. All seriousness, I try to use humor a lot. Like I said, I've been listening to a lot of people. Anthony, I'll find you later and give you another hug. But I just, to follow kind of what you had said, it stuck with me when you said that maybe I shouldn't be a police officer, that maybe I should be a therapist. I've been doing this job a long time, and I think being the school resource officer at Polk Alternative has not only made me a better police officer, but it's made me a better human being. I don't know if you're familiar with Polk Alternative. It's kids that have their IEPs. They have some behavior focus. They need a lot of care. They need a lot of love. And yes, I am the cop in the building. Unfortunately, I have had to make those decisions. It's usually victim-based. I can't tell them no. I'm not just walking the hallways arresting kids. I used to say I was colorblind. I used to say that because in my heart, but I learned that that's the wrong thing to feel. As a police officer, I need to see color. I need to be empathetic, and I need to see color, and I do. I don't treat any kid different based on their background. Oftentimes we have the SIAP program. We have kids that get in trouble in other schools and they face a hearing and they come to Polk. And I don't read up on them unless another SRO reaches out to me and says, hey, you know, this kiddo had a weapon. You might want to just, you know, just for safety reasons. But if it's something that is really not a safety issue and it's just you know, maybe a little bit of marijuana, a fight, I don't read up on that child because I don't want to prejudge them before they walk in Polk stores. And a lot of kids will say, Miss Jess, you know I'm here, Officer Jess. And I said, no, I don't. I don't want to judge you before you walk in my school. You have a clean slate with me. And to me, that's never, maybe it's naive, but it's never done me or the child wrong. I've heard a lot of people say, you know, don't take this personal, this isn't about the personal SRO, this is about our kids. And like I said, I don't know what it's feel like to be a person of color. I don't. I'm learning every day to try to build that relationship with all of my children. They're my family. I've said that a lot. Going to school today, day one, a lot of kids, they've been hearing things. A lot of parents been asking me questions because we're a family at Polk. It's so small. So a lot of them know what's going on. And when they saw my squad car there today, albeit it's a new squad car, it's a different number. So they were like, right away, they're like, where's Officer Jess? Where's car 36? And then they come in and they saw it was me. And I had so many come up to me today and were relieved to see me. And they said, does that mean you get to stay? And I said, I don't know yet. So I hope we still have that opportunity because, like I said, they're my family and I don't want to leave them because I don't want another officer, not saying other officers are bad or inferior to me, but schools are probably still going to call when there's an incident. And I don't want another officer who doesn't know this child or this family or this staff member to come in and make a decision, you know, that might make a situation escalate quicker. You know, I was gone for 6 weeks and when my mom was really ill and there was an incident there where there was a sexual assault it was in the news. And so that parent only wanted to talk to me. And so my fear is that we're going to lose that relationship with a lot of these families. I don't want to arrest kids. My lieutenant hears me on a daily basis on my body camera. Please stop doing that. I don't want to arrest you. I don't want to break paper today. Please stop doing that. We do everything in our power to not to have to arrest. We try to just, I just want to be there for my kids. So I still want to be there for my family. So thank you.
Is that all?
That's it. Thank you.
Next, we will move on to our consent agenda. Are there any items that a board member would like to pull for a comment, question, or a separate vote?
President Humbles, I need to pull item BA-22-082 for a separate vote from the consent agenda.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
My microphone. I need to pull BA-22-082 for a separate vote.
Okay. Anyone else? We will pull BA 22082. We will vote on, I need a motion to approve the consent agenda without the BA 22082. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Do we have any further discussion? This is a roll call vote.
Director Newman.
Aye.
Director Borcherding.
Aye.
Director Frack.
Aye.
Director Garlock.
Aye.
Director Tominski.
Aye.
Director Reesinger,
Aye.
President Humbles.
Aye. And now we will vote on BA 22082. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And abstain. Thank you. Next, we will move, the next item is the resolution authorizing the transfer of general funds to the student activity funds. Do we have a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other further discussion? This is a roll call vote.
Director Borcherding. Aye. Director Merschbrock. Aye. Director Garlock. Aye. Director Tominski.
Aye.
Director Reesinger.
Aye.
Director Newman.
Aye.
President Humbles.
Aye. Before we move on to learning and leadership, I'd like to take a 10-minute recess before we begin that presentation. So we will go into a 10-minute recess. them themselves and like however they deliver it.
Okay.
It's really mechanistic in there, like we're not.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. That's good. That's good.
Yeah, it's pretty.
That's fine, yep.
I was just trying to get it back together. Chocolate eater.
All right, Nancy, we're ready.
We will reconvene. And we will move on to leadership, learning and leadership. And this is the last item on our agenda. We will hear from Deputy Superintendent Quaker and Superintendent Bush regarding the summary and recommendations of the SRO program evaluation.
Thank you, President Humbles, and I think Deputy Superintendent's going to be coming to the presentation area. I would like to sincerely thank the voices of our community, from our kids, from our staff, from our parents, from our partners in CRPD. So many voices and multiple perspectives coming to the table for one reason, for our children.
Yes.
And I am never surprised of the passion of Cedar Rapids. So thank you, everyone, for bringing your voices here. And thank you for the series over the past several months. I just want to, the administration and the CRPD leadership and the amount of hundreds of hours that have gone into analyzing data, including the qualitative feedback from listening sessions, from focus groups, has been true commitment to trying to figure out what's the best move forward. And when we think about this from a systems thinking point of view, which is always a passion of mine, multiple perspectives in order to gain a better understanding of what's the next iteration. So I said this to the staff at the beginning of the school year as part of our theme, and it's something I truly believe in, and I know that this board believes in. It's about getting better at getting better. So whatever we learn, how do we get better at doing whatever it is that we're out to do? So without any further ado then, I'd like to hand it over to Deputy Superintendent Quaker, who will present our summary of the work that we've been doing the past several months of our School Resource Officer Program in partnership with CRPD.
So thank you, Superintendent Bush, President Humbles, Board of Directors, staff members, students, community members, parents, everybody who's in attendance, and everybody who has had interest in this topic that's so important to our schools and our students within our system. Tonight, as we go through, I do want to introduce before we start, Barb Hansen is a CCT specialist with us. She'll be presenting some of the slides. You gave a wave or a stand. Chanel Thomas is one of our 4 new equity coaches. She was also a counselor before in the system. She'll be assisting, and Justin Blitz, who is our Director of Culture Climate Transformation as well. So as we get started tonight, tonight's presentation is not about the Cedar Rapids Police Department. It's not about SROs. It's not about members of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion team that are presenting this information. It's also not about politics or political views. Tonight's presentation is solely about our students, the children in which we serve, and our commitment to them. It's about compiling all the data, doing all the research, and coming up with recommendations that help us collectively make changes in our disciplinary responses to student behavior. One of those responses comes from SROs with arrests, but also comes from us internally within our system and how we respond to students. And it's all about moving from punitive to restorative within our system. The challenge, or one of the challenges, has been, and Superintendent Bush alluded to this, we've been working regularly, constantly in communication with CRPD. And it's mixing these educational priorities with police who have a job to enforce the law has been the greatest challenge in trying to come up with collaborative steps in making the system better for students. We need to do better, and our students deserve better. Tonight, here are some of the pieces we're going to go through the program evaluation. So as you know, in June, we started to share data from the Department of Human Rights, from the Criminal and Juvenile Justice Planning around student arrests, and we received feedback as well from the Black Student Union Survey Group. We then had data the next board meeting from CRPD, the Panorama Survey, community feedback sessions, as well as community survey.
We also reached out to national data about the impacts of SROs, mental health supports, restorative practices, and trauma-informed instruction. We contacted multiple schools within the state and asked about their beliefs and practices. We also talked to community partners and collaborated on finding solutions to what our current data was telling us. We spent numerous hours in meetings collaborating with CRPD, talking to state, national, and local community groups, talking about schools across the state, principals of schools who have SROs, students, parents, and staff, and also principals who do not have SROs within their building. Tonight, we're going to do a quick review of our system goals and beliefs in relation to SROs and look at a high-level view of data, explain punitive versus restorative practices, discuss our internal changes as a system, SRO audit recommendations, and provide a summary of our findings to you as the board and community. So our vision, every learner, future ready. Future ready means we need to make adjustments to the services based on the data that we have. This means we need to keep students in school and not suspend or arrest students whenever that is feasibly possible. There were 678 student arrests for SROs between 2017-18 and 2021, with 460 unique individuals. Of the arrests, 50.87% were Black students, while they make up approximately only 19% of our student body. Also, in that time, 678 students were arrested, and SROs offered 40 opportunities to divert from arrest. That leaves 638 student arrests with no option but an arrest. Between 2015 and 2021, we suspended an average of 2,194.5 students a year. You ask, where did the 0.5 come from? It was adding them all together and just dividing by the 4 years. If we want every learner future ready, we need our students in school. Suspending them and arresting them is not the answer. We need to shift our focus to other forms of consequences that remediate, provide support, restore, and change the narrative for our students. Here is our strategic plan. As you know, we have some system indicators, and these are around student achievement, equity, and graduation rate. So utilizing iReady data, so that's one of our assessments that are given to our middle school students, also some of our elementary students. But we identified with 95% confidence that about 7% more proficient middle school students are uncomfortable around an SRO than their proficient peers. If students do not feel safe in a sense of belonging, these academic gaps will continue to be prevalent because their focus is not going to be on learning within our buildings. We also know exclusionary discipline and arrests increase the likelihood of students dropping out, decreasing student achievement, which is in conflict with our strategic plan. We also utilize the high reliability schools framework. And if you look around the side, access and equity are embedded in all 5 levels, all the way from the safe and collaborative culture all the way up to competency-based education. This framework shows how best practices work together and provide indicators to empower districts and schools to measure their progress on attaining the 5 levels of reliability. The foundational level before all the other work can assist and happen is all with that safe and collaborative culture. Our students need to feel safe within the walls of our students, and not just 75 or 80% of them, all of them have to feel safe within the walls of our schools. Here's our 6 belief statements as a district. And this is really hard because I can correlate this topic and disciplinary procedures to absolutely all of them, but I pulled out the 3 that I thought had the most impact that directly correlate, and that is equity, student learning, and culture climate. I want to take a second to read the equity one because we believe in the equity of voices, resources, opportunities, and expectations is critical for the current and future success of every student that we serve. It also, of course, directly impacts our student learning and the culture and climate that we're establishing for the students and staff within our system. With that, I'm going to pass it to Barb for data review.
All right, so I'm going to review some data that we've previously shared, but hits kind of the highlights of the key points. First of all, I want to share that we took a lot of effort to be very comprehensive in the resources that we used and gathered. We had the feedback sessions, we had the Department of Human Rights data, the BSU survey, the Panorama survey, the community survey, and CRPD data. In addition to that, as Deputy Soup alluded to, we've had a lot of input from different individuals. We've had research articles shared with us, and we have spent a lot of time this summer looking very closely at this. One of the comments at a previous board meeting was regarding the validity of our surveys. So this kind of just gives you a spotlight of what our student population looks like compared to the representation that was in both the BSU and the Panorama survey. In regards to validity, we know that that we had representation, as you can see, that closely correlated to our student population. But we did ask our data analyst to look closely at this, and she said that the Panorama survey error rate was about 2% and the BSU survey error rate was about 4%. A survey error rate of less than 6% indicates that your results are highly valid. So just wanted to share that. This specific survey question, what is your level of comfort being around your school resource officer? Just a reminder, 1 in 4 of our students who identify as 2 or more races or as Black felt that they were not, they identified as feeling uncomfortable or very uncomfortable around their SRO. Our HRS framework embeds equity and access into everything that we do, and yet we have had the diversion program around since the inception of SROs, and we have only diverted around 40 students, as Deputy Superintendent also alluded to. Specifically, since January 1st of this year, it was reported at the last presentation with CRPD that we have diverted 6 students, 4 which were white, 2 which were Black, which again just kind of contributes to that disproportionality that we see when Blacks accounted for over 50% of the rest while making up 19% of the student body. This is the Panorama student survey that we saw. Just refreshing, we had 1,813 responses. This question, how safe or unsafe do you feel having an SRO in your school? We just want to point out that this isn't just about Black and brown students. We could see a trend even with all students. 13%, over 1 in 10, felt somewhat unsafe or very unsafe. 16% of special ed students felt somewhat unsafe or very unsafe. 20% of our ELL population, and 24% of our Black student population. We also previously reported that Black students had 6 times the risk of having an arrest compared to white students. I've seen some questions about this, and so I wanted to clarify. That is based on the 1920 data. If we do a 4-year average, that was calculated a relative risk of Black students having 4 times the risk of white students. Still very elevated. This is just a comparison of our survey data matrix to show that everything that we gathered was very consistent. The BSU survey, the community survey, the Panorama survey all indicated that about 20% of our Black students did not feel comfortable or safe around their SRO. We also want to share, as we have previously, that the respondents who believe SROs are needed was consistent with both the BSU survey and the community survey. Also, just wanted to point out another data point that 71% of the complaints against Black students from 2015 to 2020 were for simple misdemeanors. We heard several people speak about this. This is disorderly conduct, interference with official acts, simple assault, things like that. These are very subjective charges and give police a lot of discretion in contrast to charges that there may be like a weapon or drugs that doesn't involve such subjectivity. I'm going to pass it over to Justin now.
So we heard Deputy Superintendent Quaker talk about our desire to move from more punitive practices to more restorative practices. And so one thing that I really appreciated about the opportunity to go through this audit was that it really allowed us to recenter on our values and make sure that the policies, practices, systems, and structures that we had in place were aligned with our values and beliefs. And so when we think about the practices that we have, we know that exclusionary discipline, when a student's removed from a classroom or removed from school through suspension, or when charges are filed against a student, we know, the research tells us, that that increases the likelihood that that behavior will actually reoccur. It increases the likelihood that that student will engage in other antisocial behaviors. It increases the likelihood that that student will be disengaged with school, will lower attendance, all of these factors that we know we don't want for our students. We also know that when students experience exclusionary discipline or charges, that it not only makes them feel less safe, but it makes their peers feel less safe, even peers who are unaffected by the arrest or just a simple bystander. And so in places where exclusionary discipline is heavily used or arrests are high, we know that that's the case. And so in any system, one of my mentors used to say quite frequently, every system is exquisitely designed to get the results that it's getting. And so we want to make sure that when we're engaging in practices, that they're giving us the best opportunity for success and giving us the results that we want. And so what we believe as a system is that rather than using exclusionary discipline, suspensions, or arrests, we want to engage in practices that teach students the appropriate behaviors through social emotional learning skills. We want to provide logical consequences that are going to support students, and we want to provide opportunities for restoration. So if the community is harmed or another individual is harmed, we want to provide those opportunities for restoration. And so that's really what we wanted to center on as we were going through this process and thinking about our policies and practices. So really stepping back and saying we acknowledge as a school that we have work to do, and this is not just an issue with SROs. One thing that we did notice, we often hear that maybe schools with higher poverty rates or other issues, there just might be more students misbehaving in those spaces. And this is some data that we found that when you control for poverty and issues like that, we see that in spaces where there are SROs versus schools where there are not SROs, there's a 5 times higher rate that students will be charged for disorderly conduct in a school where an SRO is present versus a school where an SRO is not present. Again, controlling for factors like poverty and things of that nature. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Barb.
Okay, so we talked to several school districts, but we're going to highlight 2 of them tonight specifically. One of them that we've worked closely with over the last couple of months is the Des Moines Public School District. One of our first conversations was actually with Lindy and Eric, Indy and Lyric, I apologize for that, who were 2 of the students who really led that effort in the Des Moines Public School District. And one of my favorite quotes from Indy is, "It's not our goal to equitably arrest students, it's our goal to not arrest students." So we got a lot of guidance from them. We met with the director of School Climate and Transformation a few times. We learned that prior, they were spending about $750,000 per year to have 11 SROs. That was paid for by the city at a rate of 60% and the district at 40%. They shifted from being punitive to being restorative, and how they did that was when we talk about safety as being a big concern when we change how our SROs operate, they replace them. So they added restoration and safety coordinators. These people are specially trained in restoration. They're trained in counseling. They're social workers. They're therapists. They're people with these backgrounds where they've had years of education around dealing with profound trauma and handling situations that in a restorative way. They also increased their number of campus monitors. These are people that patrolled the hallways or monitored spaces that they felt needed additional adult support, and they added restoration facilitators. They also created a chart to support their staff on next steps of when you have this happen, what do you do? And when do you involve law enforcement? So it's very clear for the people within their building on what is it that we as a school handle versus when do we involve law enforcement. They also emphasize the importance of training the staff around restorative work. It's not enough just to have restorative practitioners come in or facilitators to come in if we don't have that capacity built throughout our building. So those are a few of the highlights that we learned from the Des Moines School District, and I'll let Nicole share a little bit about what Iowa City shared with us.
So Iowa City School District is a little bit different. They have not had SROs. They do have a safety team that has met and explored whether there should be SROs in the system or not, and determined at this point of time not to have SROs. I love the quote from them: "We can't make some students feel more safe by making other students less safe." I think that's extremely powerful when you think about our entire system. And I know people think, well, you know, majority wins in things. Majority doesn't win in a situation where there's kids that don't feel safe within the walls of our buildings. They have supervisory paraeducators still. They focus on relationships with students. They, again, like I said, has that safety and security team. And they also have, there's a Dewey Cornell process, which is a lot of times actually called a threat assessment. But for verbiage, that doesn't sound appropriate. It's actually a care assessment. How can we wrap our arms around a student or a family that has some trauma issues, that's experiencing some misbehaviors within our walls? That's what they do to try to keep kids safe and still address. They do have arrests. They, of course, still call the Iowa City Police Department, but they're a small amount comparatively to our system, even though I know they have about 2,000 less students in Iowa City, but a very small amount of arrests that are happening with Iowa City currently. But it's also not just SROs arresting students. It's their mental state, right, of being more restorative than punitive is their goal within their system, and they've been working on that for quite a few years. So cost analysis, this has been brought up a few times. This isn't just about money, right? It's not, in fact, it's not about money, but people have been asking, what are the costs? So we share the costs, which are about $950,000 between the city and ourselves for the cost of the SROs over a 2-year term. So that's about $138,000 per SRO. Here's also some data on each school has access to a teenager therapist for the total cost of $335,000. The average cost for each building is about $10,800. We also have restorative practitioners in schools through partnerships with Kids First. And the total cost of that is $95,000, averaging about $13,500 per practitioner. We also talked about, of course, there's nurses, there's counselors of our own. So average therapists in Cedar Rapids make $47,885, nurses an average of $49,059. And then, of course, we have, again, the community partners that partner with us for services for students.
Hello, I'm Chanel Thomas. I currently work as one of the district equity coaches. I've also worked as an engagement specialist and a school counselor. And so I'm here to talk about personal stories and lived experiences. I'm not going to talk about my personal story per se, but I'm talking from the lens of what it has been like supporting students in the buildings, okay? And so I've been thinking of this analogy that I would like, y'all just gonna walk with me because I got the podium, so y'all have no choice. So I think about, like, when I think about access, right? Like, so I imagine when I was fasting, how I kept my water bottle on me at all times, right? So I was thirsty or I was hungry, so I had my water bottle. If I ever had my water bottle in a different room, that means I had to make some decisions, right? I had to make the decision of when I'm gonna get up. Do I really want the water that bad? You know, maybe I'm not as thirsty as I thought. And so I would like to use sort of that same sort of imagery when we talk about our schools having access to SROs in the building, okay? If you're thirsty and you have an SRO, which is your water bottle, right next to you, it's easier to use that tool, right? It's easier to use that resource. As opposed to if that water bottle or that SRO was in a different building or a house somewhere else or not in our schools, there are some things that you have to think about before you decide to call that SRO or to receive that water bottle. So there we go. In terms of personal stories, I have been on the end of supporting students after they had to watch a peer get escorted out the building in handcuffs. I had to support students when we had 5 squad cars pull up to the school and they're concerned about their peers. And so when we're having conversations about educating our students in our buildings, we have to consider what is it like, what trauma brings, like what trauma is reignited in them when they see something like that. Like honestly, if you were in a position and your best friend, you watch your best friend get handcuffed and being yelled at to calm down, and the response of your friend is, I can't. How honest is that? To have a 16-year-old say, I cannot calm down. And while this student is saying, I cannot calm down, there's a weapon faced at her. And so I can talk about the experience of what it's like for me as a black woman, being concerned about our students of color. I can talk about that lens. I can talk about what it's like for me to try to compartmentalize what I'm experiencing, because y'all don't know my background either, right? And so what it's like for me to have to hold onto my own trauma, take on the trauma of my students so that I can support them so that they can get through the rest of their day. This is like the stuff that we're talking about. And so like hearing stories, and this is me going off a little bit, but like I said, I got the mic, so y'all gonna bear with me. But when I hear people talk about like individual SROs, we're not talking about individual people. Like I've been around SROs that I've liked, you know what I'm saying? But like at the end of the day, if we're looking at the data, if we're talking to our students, if we're truly listening to our community, the people who represent 50% of our arrests, like if we truly listen and we're truly like a district that's saying that equity is something that we care about and that we're holding at the center front, well, here you have students, community members who make up 20% of your population. But then when you look at how they're being policed or consequenced or whatever language you want to use, they're making up 50%. Like we have to look at that. And so I also, this is Chanel speaking, but I also want to reiterate that we have to hold our district accountable as well. This is a partnership. And so a lot of the conversation has been focused on the SROs and like our police department. And so like, okay, sure. But the other side of that coin is that our schools have not been effective and efficient in providing a safe, collaborative culture. And so that's the focus that we need to come back to. When we're looking at data, when we're hearing people talk, okay, there's no way that 20% of a population should make up 50% of arrests. That in and of itself, without having any context, should be alarming. And so I'll stop at that.
So to segue from what we just heard Chanel share, we know that we need to work on our own systems and structures as a district. And this isn't just about the SROs, this is in the police department, this is about us creating that safe and collaborative culture that we just heard Chanel talk about. And so what are we doing as a district to focus on that safe and collaborative culture and making sure that that's in place for our staff and students? And so we are in the process of creating a new Tier 1 handbook that will provide consistency across our system when it comes to social emotional behavior structures, making sure every student gets what they need and we can effectively monitor what those supports and structures look like. Right now we currently have trained restorative practitioners in 8 of our buildings, which is a great support for us that we can utilize as we move to a more restorative culture. We have 31 therapists in 31 of our buildings, so all students can have access to that mental health support that we know that they need. We're having our interventionists, engagement specialists, facilitators, administrators getting access to equity, professional learning, and restorative practices training. This will also be the first year that K-12, we will have explicit social and emotional learning curricular resources that all students will have access to, and so we can really build on those skills like self-management and responsible decision-making and relationship skills that we know will decrease the amount of behaviors that we see in our spaces. We also obviously are having a huge focus on equity. We've heard Superintendent Bush and Deputy Superintendent Quaker talk about that's going to be a prominent focus for us this year, as it has been, but really having a laser focus on it this year. So we have a 3-year plan to ensure that all staff members in our system have access to the intercultural development inventory and associated professional learning. Every single building in our system has an equity goal embedded into their school improvement plan this year, and they'll be receiving support around that from our equity coaches and the executive directors. We're going to be having our administrators have access to professional learning around equity in the intercultural development inventory. We've obviously added our 4 equity coaches, and we have a DEI team who's going to be consistently monitoring the data to make sure that we're making progress in the areas that we really want to focus on and make progress on.
So I want to stress here again the collaboration with the Cedar Rapids Police Department. And this is not a reflection of them, and it's not a reflection of our SROs within the system. It's a reflection of us serving students. And this isn't just Cedar Rapids, right? This is all over. Education is typically punitive versus restorative. So it's a shift in mindsets, it's a shift in training. We've had some great conversations administratively with the principals. This is the mindset of where educators come from, and it's surely the mindset of where police officers come from. Their job is to keep us safe, to keep peace, and to arrest people that are committing crimes. As I talk through these next pieces, these conversations, these collaborative conversations have been anything but easy, right? We haven't always been on the same page, but we have agreed and talked through and resolved that we are moving towards these goals collaboratively as a partnership, which is creating an environment where all students feel safe and supported. We can agree that's really important for our system. Install in students and staff a sense of belonging. We have a lot of survey data saying that everybody doesn't feel that sense of belonging, which again equates to student achievement gaps. And then our job is to educate and teach students about appropriate behaviors and responses through that trauma-informed lens are all critically important. Outcomes of success. Ultimately, we want to again shift to restorative, which means we're going to reduce arrests. We want to reduce charges. We want to reduce out-of-school suspensions, in-school suspensions. We want to reduce the reduction of disproportionality of arrests for our Black students. And when we just said this one of all students, then we moved to Black students because again, our disproportionality is so large there, so just decreasing everyone by 50% doesn't address the disproportionality that we need to look at. The monthly reports that are received and reviewed by district leadership, we need intentional outcomes and metrics when we receive those here at the ELSC, and also with the building principals that are working with the SROs, and then shared leadership. What do these safety initiatives look like? I mean, they are the experts in lockdown drills, run, hide, fight training for staff, so better utilizing the people that are the experts on safety within our system makes a lot of sense. For the changes agreed upon, the first is a lot of things, but they already were sending us some monthly reports. We've talked about what those monthly reports need to cover, and we definitely want some more categories. We want some positive things, but we want it broken down by race, disability status, gender. We want to make sure that we have those reports in our hands, SROs have those reports, and we're really talking through what the data is saying. And then we want to make sure on a quarterly basis, we're meeting up with CRPD, and trust me, it's been way more than on a quarterly basis, it's like a weekly basis. Lieutenant Garvey and I are talking multiple times. So I think all of those things they've said, we are going to do that. We are going to work with you to get better outcomes for our students. So before we get into details, some of the things that have also been requested as changes, but again, this is a collaborative partnership. And just as much as CRPD doesn't step in our shoes from an educational lens, we don't step in their shoes from the lens of what it looks like to keep people safe. So we discussed SROs not carrying a gun. I know at least one of you alluded to that as you spoke. This was something they don't want to agree to. That's part of what they carry with them to keep people safe. They need to be able to respond, and they felt strongly about that. So we took it to the next level about how about if the gun is concealed? But they are trained with all of their equipment. So we had to say, you know what, we understand that. We understand you have your equipment. There's training that goes with that, and that's what you bring to every situation. We also talked about managing building safety drills. There's a lot of safety drills. It wasn't just lockdowns, and our principals agreed they can do it, and our SROs and CRPD said, you know, we don't need to manage tornado drills and fire drills and all those pieces, but lockdown drills we can gladly help and assist with. The last one, we have talked about what does this look like at middle schools. So when we get further in the presentation, as we go through, these are all recommendations. These are recommendations we've collaboratively worked on There are some things that they've given on and we've given on, and there are some things that we still don't fully agree on that as a board you can talk through and give us some opinions on and feedback and data. But none of these recommendations have been put into place yet. The things that we have agreed upon are right here. All the other things that we're going to be reviewing are recommendations based on all the research and the data and the input from the community, from our students, from CRPD, from staff members, everybody that's gone into this. So I want everybody to think as we go through this and we talk about what these recommendations are. Collaboration first, steps to changes in our system, and we'll talk through each one of what they look like and where we're at. And again, nothing's been agreed to but this piece at this time, but we'll be giving some of those more details as we dig into this.
All right, so our first recommendation is to wear soft uniforms on a daily basis. This would help with ease some anxiety around the uniform itself, make people feel like these individuals are more approachable. And this was an item that we got feedback on from students, staff, and community very consistently. It was one of the issues that people were the most passionate about. The soft uniform would be a khaki pant and a polo top. Like Deputy Superintendent Quicker said, they would still have their belt with their tools accessible, including their weapon on them. Our recommendation number 2 is that they will assist with teaching run, hide, and fight to all staff in all 32 buildings, scheduled at the beginning of the year. Recommendation number 3 is that we will divert first offenses whenever possible and always look to divert instead of arrest with the focus on restoration, teaching, and logic versus punishment. Recommendation number 4, the district and CRPD will collaboratively work on receiving ongoing trainings, and this is something that we talked about, and they are very receptive to and willing to participate in and have expressed interest previously. We want to focus specifically on restorative practices, the intercultural development inventory and continuum. That's the IDI that you hear people mentioning, including our SROs in that process. De-escalation training, and trauma-informed care. All of these trainings have already been scheduled as we move through this conversation. If we decide to move forward with these recommendations, those have already been arranged.
Our 5th recommendation would be that SROs will work with building principals on facilitating, leading, and organizing lockdown drills for all 32 schools, and also allowing SROs to be more involved in professional learning. And so that's going to be different depending on the building, but it could be on things like vaping, it could be like things on cyberbullying, but things that would be within their expertise. They could provide professional learning in those regards. And then CRPD will incorporate the Handle with Care program. And so this is a program in which if there was an incident that took place in a household, so say an officer responded to a domestic abuse call, and there was children within our district who were at that home, the officers would then be able to contact our district, where then we could reach out to the building, and we would be able to simply say the student's name and to Handle with Care. So we wouldn't, they wouldn't necessarily know the details of the event, but they would know that that student was involved in a potentially traumatic situation the evening before, and then could provide additional supports for that student.
All right, if you look up here, recommendation, remove SROs from 2 current middle school placements. So this one's been a lot of conversation. We talked majorly about the rationale between McKinley and Roosevelt, and you've heard some of those conversations, are 2 of our most racially and ethnically diverse middle schools, and there's no data to suggest that these schools are unsafe or need CRPD support. So we talked about that still continuing as an option, but not an option that we felt good about because we couldn't provide data, which I'll go through in a minute, of why we would place them in those 2 buildings. We've also talked about spreading the 2 SROs of the middle schools over the 6 buildings and what that could potentially look like. There was some concern about relationships, and they would never be in the right place at the right time if they're serving 3 buildings. Also an option. And then, of course, we've discussed the recommendation of removal from the 2 current middle schools, which I'm going to cover a little bit of that data, and that's coming from the school district side, but all of those are options on the table. In addition to potentially something that we may not have thought about, Superintendent Bush and I have talked about maybe they could serve just not even the 6 middle schools as the 2, but maybe we could expand it to PK through 8, and they serve as kind of the liaison and the support for some of the training and opportunities that we provide in elementaries and middle schools. I think options are endless, but this is just transparency of how we've arrived at where we're at. So if you look at the average number of arrests per year, I think it shows us that our schools are extremely safe, and this is over the past 4 years. And this is with SROs, of course, in 2 of our buildings. When we look at the number of office referrals, this is for 1920, this is for each of the schools you can see across, and then the number of out-of-school suspensions, which is also numbers that we need to reduce. But overall, we're saying our data supports the fact that our middle schools are safe. Another piece of data we really looked at is that frontal lobe development, and I know at least one of our speakers tonight talked about it. Brains are not fully developed, typically until mid to late 20s, so you could argue this point for high school students as well. But when we're arresting students for poor choices that have had traumatic experiences and not necessarily teaching those behaviors, are giving opportunities for school consequences or potentially diversion, or the first time offense we're arresting, that isn't the way we want to respond to students in a restorative environment. That doesn't create equity and access. So that was another reason for our thinking. And the third one was all about creating the safe environment. We have 4 middle schools right now that function without SROs, that we actually did call them and say, hey, what do you think of the idea of having SROs in your buildings? And I don't want to put them in the bad spot. Actually just asking them put them kind of in a bad spot, because they're like, oh my gosh, what did you want us to say and what do you think we should say? They believe schools are safe, and there's a perception if you have an SRO and a cop car, especially in a system that has 2 at the middle schools and 4 without, that we're creating unsafe environments at those 2 buildings, and that's why we have SROs there, and it's a bad message. So again, transparently, we've explored all over the gamut based on the data, based on the points that I covered. Our recommendation as a diversity, equity, inclusion team at this point of time would be to remove those 2 from the current middle schools. And you can figure out just by the total number of arrests over 4 years, it was 59 at McKinley, 51 Taft, 47 Roosevelt, all the way down to 14 at Harding. So very low. Schools will not involve SROs in enforcing school rules or discipline. We know and acknowledge that a lot of times our principals are extremely busy, our associate principals are busy, engagement specialists. There's a lot of people in the building serving kids, but people are busy. So sometimes, you know, you have an SRO there to assist, and maybe it's carrying, I'm going to use drugs again, maybe I shouldn't, but I have a little bit of, and I'm not good with drug jargon, just so you know, a little dime bag, we talked through this, of some marijuana in my pocket. We don't need to necessarily arrest, right? But again, brain set and the way our policies and procedures are set, we got to immediately call an SRO, and an SRO then has the jurisdiction, and then the SRO by law can formally arrest whether we want them to or not. Now again, our SROs, I know are fabulous. This is the other hard piece of this. It's not about the people that are SROs in our buildings. It's about the fact if they're in our buildings, it does become easier, and Barb alluded to that earlier in the presentation. But again, if we have them involved in a school situation and they had any trauma, or it is something that's illegal, but maybe it's their first offense and we haven't tried school discipline, we haven't tried counseling, we haven't tried any drug rehabilitation, whatever it is that may need, we're jumping already to an arrest that will stick with that student long term. And the proof of that is with consequences that stick with them in the school to prison pipeline. Okay, the last one, well, not the last one, number 10. Cedar Rapids will only have SROs respond directly to students when the situation is a serious criminal matter where there's real and imminent and immediate threat, safety concerns, sexual assault, and so forth. So what we've been working on currently, and our principals at our buildings with SROs have just seen this as a first draft, we've been collecting from other schools. Is there some type of matrix that shows when does it make sense to think through when you call your SRO officer or when you call the Cedar Rapids Police Department? And when are things where, you know what, I can keep that dime bag locked in a drawer, call the SRO, file a report and say they need to pick it up without submitting who the student was. With that said, because there's a lot of people who argue with me, Nicole, drugs is illegal. Yes, it is. And we do not want to send the message to any of our kids or our families or anybody that it's okay. With that said, there are consequences that don't equate to a legal arrest that can change behavior for students and supports we can put in place on first offenses. And like I said, I'm using that. I'm not going to use it for a weapon, but maybe insubordination. Maybe Mr. Blitz is my teacher and I'm having a bad day and he's talking to me and I call him a blankety blink blank blank. It's going to probably send me to the office, right? Probably appropriate. Not probably. It is appropriate. But how can we de-escalate and talk through that situation versus get a disorderly conduct charge for the student?
Thanks. It's me, Chanel, again. Our 10th recommendation. If parents so let me start over. So parents or guardians will be given the right to be present if their child is being questioned in connection with any potential crime by the SRO. Sounds easy, right? Well, I'm here to tell you that sometimes parents are not notified ahead of time that their student is being questioned. So, hence, recommendation number 11. Number 12 recommendation. SROs will attempt to not respond to warrants or arrest students or their parents on school grounds for incidents that did not occur at school. They will wait for them to leave school grounds before making the arrest, and another non-SRO officer will respond to the warrants. Here's where I insert a story, because believe it or not, this recommendation exists for a reason. So imagine your child gets sent to the office for whatever reason, and you are a parent who wants to support your child because your child is in the office. This is an elementary child. So while the parent and the student are in the office talking with the admin, the SRO overhears the conversation, runs the parent through the system, sees that the parent has a warrant, goes into the room to walk the parent out to issue the warrant or the arrest for warrant. So, recommendation number 12, just wait. Oh, okay. I guess I'm here for 13 as well. School administrators will not have SROs listen to the questioning of students before they know there needs to be police involvement due to the severity or nature of the action. So, this comes into effect if you have a student who is suspected of having done something. The school administrator will not have the SRO present unless the administrator knows for sure that police involvement needs to happen. And that's due based to the severity or the nature of why the student is being questioned. I got another one. Number 14. All CRCSD students in schools with SROs will be informed about their rights when interacting with the CRPD. I feel like that one's pretty self-explanatory. We need to know our rights. As some people alluded to earlier, students don't always know their rights. And so, if we are going to move forward with having SROs in our schools, then we need to be intentional about making sure that our students know their rights.
So I just want to touch base on this one a little bit more too. These aren't the Miranda rights we're talking about. We're talking about if I have a backpack and an SRO stops me and wants to search my backpack, what are my rights as a student? Or if they want to question me, is it okay if I contact my parents? Like those types of things. So I think Bernard talked about it earlier tonight. If we're going to have SROs in buildings, students should know what they can and can't do and what they can ask. I was actually shocked. Lieutenant McGarvey and I were talking about, I didn't know police could lie to you. I watch enough Dateline, you'd think I'd have that down, but I really didn't think they can just lie to try to come up with something. Now, recognizing that is not typical fashion and that's not used regularly out of police, but it is something that they can utilize if they needed to. They can lie. So new learning. So in summary, at Cedar Rapids, we believe in the following. So the first one was equity and access for everyone. So right now, without making changes, we're not providing equitable opportunities for students, when over 40% of our Black and African American students saw a difference in how SROs discipline students of color versus white students. We are arresting students at disproportionate rates, and we're operating in a punitive versus restorative mindset in many of our buildings within our system. And that's not, again, SROs, that's also us. So 2, we believe in creating a safe, supportive, and collaborative culture. This is HRS level 1 that we talked about earlier in the presentation. So from 2015 to 2021, 65% of the criminal arrests were made against white students, and 71% of arrests were made against Black students for simple misdemeanors. Misdemeanors for juveniles involve disorderly conduct such as disruption of class, interference with official acts, and simple assault with no injury. We are shifting to handle these situations with school discipline and not formal arrests, and we're all on board collaboratively saying that's the route to go when there's minor incidences that can be handled with the school discipline. 3, we believe in education, logic, and restoration. Charges in Cedar Rapids schools increased over 20% over the last 5 years. Research shows that schools with SROs have higher arrest rates than those without within our system and as a nation. We are moving from arresting students and suspending them to educating them, utilizing school consequences, as well as using diversion programs when needed and available. We believe in teaching students. This includes behavior, point number 4. Juvenile arrests are associated with an increase in high school dropouts and a decrease in college enrollment, as well as students being more likely to end up in the adult criminal system. Once they enter into the criminal system, their chances of graduating are drastically reduced. And then number 5, every learner future ready. Currently, approximately 30% of our students do not feel safe or a sense of belonging within our schools based on multiple survey metrics that have been collected. Our system indicators are around improving graduation rates, academic performance, and equity. Without meeting students' basic foundational needs, we're not going to be able to close student achievement gaps, and students need to feel that sense of belonging and safety before student achievement gaps are going to decrease. This then ties to equitable opportunities for all students. Every student deserves our very best, and it is our responsibility to meet them where they're at and to help them grow. Our recommendations for the program changes are the first steps in this process towards making our schools more restorative than punitive, and these intentional actions will create more equitable opportunities for students, as well as more access to daily instruction. We will continue to monitor progress and data and update the board and community as requested. Every student given every opportunity to reach their potential is our goal as we work together collaboratively. Questions from the board?
First of all, I want to thank you for the presentation, very comprehensive and the collaborative presentation. And on behalf of the board, we do appreciate the time and thought you put into this and the program evaluation and the administration's recommendation. But as I turn to the board members at this time, let's open up with any reflections or comments that you'd like to share. I'm opening it up to board. Is there any?
For reflections or for questions?
It can be reflections, questions, yes. Okay. Either or.
Well, I guess I will go first.
Okay.
So a reflection is, I just want to be really super clear about this. On the back of this that says our name, on the back it says, how will this decision impact students? That is what leads me and my questions and my work on this board. So when I'm asking questions, and I'm asking for clarification, it isn't about individuals, it's about our students. So that is my reflection there.
Any other comments? Reflections, questions?
I think that it's really important that we realize that so much of this doesn't come down to, and I don't mean this as a pun, black and white decisions. It is so important we have the right people in the right seats at our schools who have our children's best interest at heart. And I just, my other reflection from this is just, it goes back to when you say majority rules is not the way this works. Majority rules is what got us in this situation, frankly, and built inequity in the system. And just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So my big takeaway tonight is really, we have to have the right people in the right seats, and we have to constantly assess whether we are making the right decisions for our students. And I just want to thank everybody for putting that work in, and the people who are here tonight to make those comments.
And I'd like to comment, because we've heard the good, what's not so good, what is bad, and we know as a district, we have to step back and look at, and like Director Borcherdine says, I look at this, it says, how will this decision impact students? And it's about our students in our school district, because they want to feel welcome. They want to feel safe. They want to feel respected. So we have some work as a district to do. The presentation has helped, and I appreciate that we have the facts, but we know there's still work that needs to be done.
I have a quick reflection. I've appreciated all the comments from all sides of this issue, and I hope that the board is able to take some time and digest everything that we've heard in these last two meetings. I will say the one thing that resonated with me that really stands out is the quote that you read from Iowa City. Just to revisit that, we can't make some students feel more safe by making other students feel less safe. And I think, I mean, you can all look at us up here at the board table. There are many of us sitting up here who have not had the same experiences as the 30% of our students who feel uncomfortable. And I think it is upon our shoulders to make sure that all of our students feel safe, not just 70%.
I do have additional, I'm sorry. Was somebody going to speak?
Yeah, why don't we get Vice President Tominski and.
Looking at recommendation 8, and so it sounds like the recommendation is to remove the SROs from the middle schools. You show us the data about the arrests in the middle schools. Is the data, did we see it at a previous meeting for high schools? Because the recommendation is to leave the SROs as they are in the high schools.
This is a great point, and there is arrest data specifically for the high schools broken down we have looked at, but I can share that with the board again. The other piece that we talked about is our foundational level 1 of HRS has been more developed at our middle school level within our system than it has at the high school. This year is the first year that our high school administrators and staff are really working on establishing that, having a handbook, as Mr. Blitz talked about and alluded to, having the habitudes, instruction, and curriculum in place. So it's really looking at, we believe all of our schools are safe, but collaboratively working through what are the best first steps to really look at this and review. And again, I think these are first steps. We continually have to look at our data, review where we're at, what are the arrests look like, what are our suspensions looking like, what are we doing to make sure students stay within the walls of our buildings so they can be educated. But definitely the middle schools are further in that development, no fault of administrators or staff in the buildings, just a reality of our system of where we're at.
And then maybe another question, when I look at the recommendations, so many of them seem to revolve around training, which I'm happy to see, right? I mean, I think that was pretty clear that there's additional training that's needed. Who's paying for that? And is that staff? Is that SROs going through it as well as staff with the district?
Great question. So we've already identified, and we have some really skilled internal people here. So the training would be provided by our school district and be in collaboration again with our SROs and some of our administration. Some of our administrators have had some training, but others have not. But really, we believe in that partnership and getting the training together and having those conversations of what it looks like to be implemented, whether it's Jefferson, Washington, Metro, whatever building it is that we're looking at. So we do have the details on the specific trainings. We even have the dates in place because we've tried to really work through this on what this will look like as a system for this upcoming school year.
If I can ask one last question, and then I'll shut up for a long time. we're in the middle of a 3-year contract, is that correct? We're 2 years into a 3-year contract?
Right, with 1
So the
year.
recommendations we're making are for this upcoming year,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And there's nothing for this board to vote on tonight.
That is accurate.
that-
Great question and
We're
clarification.
not voting on anything tonight.
For now.
Director Borcherding, did you have another question?
I do. So just to be clear on that implementation timeline, this isn't happening until next fall. These recommendations being enacted now?
These would be recommendations for immediately.
Yes.
So what would happen is the contract would come back to you as a board at the next meeting based on you and having the ability to have conversations, provide feedback, and then us working collaboratively with CRPD on an amendment or changes to that contract.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. You know, I'm seeing a lot of goals and I'm seeing a lot of like collaborative effort being put around shared work, and that is fantastic. I am still unclear on what problem this program is designed to address.
You said the,
What problem is the SRO program designed to address? I'm still unclear on what the problem is.
So I
see
think
goals and
initially,
actions.
and this probably isn't going to be a good answer, but initially schools started this because of the safety of the Columbine shooting. So SROs became added to schools. I know we did not do that until 2010. And at that point in time, it was an administrator that felt passionately about trying SROs in the system. We talk about relationships, and I know we have fabulous SROs forming relationships. I will never say that's not the case. I'm really standing here hoping all of us that work within the school system establish fabulous relationships with our students. So I know that's one of the things. We've also talked about the community policing aspect. So if they can work in the system, outside of the system, become safer has been an aspect that they have taught me as we've had many conversations. But ultimately, lots of questions were raised tonight. Could money be better spent on therapists and on other people within our system? And we do have ESSER dollars now, so we are doing all of those things. So I don't want people to think we don't have mental health supports for our children, because we do. That doesn't mean we can't look to shift and have more supports, more nurses, more counselors, more teachers. Everybody could argue a point for more of something, more paras, whatever it is.
So kind of based on that, I guess a follow-up question we're trying to wrap around and provide supports for safety, for social emotional learning, for adverse childhood experiences, for trauma-informed instruction. I guess my question is, if this program never existed, in 2021, would we be implementing it in this manner? To address this problem?
I would say no, we would not.
But I have a question. So these are recommendations. Are the SROs in the middle schools still reporting to the middle schools?
So in partnership with CRPD, we discussed this just last week as a recommendations, and we determined them not being there a day happens, or 2 days or a week, where they could be at a training, right, or be somewhere else. But to put them in a building connected to kids and adults, that again, as you can hear, there's emotion. People love their SROs, would create trauma not only for the SRO, but for our students, for our staff members there. So we put a hold on having them report this week. They were in buildings last week because, again, we didn't want any more trauma from the situation until decisions were made. It will be very easy to put them into a school to provide the support, but it would be very hard, of course, to have them make those connections again and say, oh, sorry, tomorrow you don't report, and now you've connected all the kids on the first day.
It was truly the timing of our board meeting to be able to have this discussion. And
Is taking them out of the middle schools a matter of we can't put them in all of our middle schools, so we're not going to put them into, and I understand the metrics there, but kind of to what Director Borcherding said, would we be implementing this way if we had unlimited budget and we could do what we want? Would we put six SROs in 6 middle schools?
So we didn't make the recommendation based on budget constraints, because again, we have the opportunity this year that we've never had to have ESSER dollars and so forth. We made the recommendation based on frontal lobe development of middle school students, the fact that our data, we believe, and we didn't dig into that till we started discussing not the 2 that they're currently in, to really dig in to see, wow, do we need SROs in our buildings? Not that, again, they don't form relationships and provide any value, but are there other services and supports that we're working towards in the restorative fashion that we can continue to focus on? So it wasn't about what they don't do or we need more. It was just about really digging into that data and going, wow, this is an epiphany of our data's really pretty good.
One of the questions that surfaced early on in the conversations when we were analyzing this in this late spring, early summer was, do we spread the 2 resources around all 6 schools? The concern was presented early tonight was, what would the focus be? How would that shift the focus? And would they be able to establish the relationships within the buildings? So even as of last week, we're still having this conversation to say, well, perhaps it's proactive measures of the educational components of what does it mean to be a citizen, cyberbullying, as you were saying, other ways in which our SROs might be able to deliver instruction and be a resource across all the middle schools instead of just 2. So we did have those discussions as well.
And I think what's important too is whatever we decide, because we are not voting tonight, that we need to make sure if we keep them or if we don't, we got to look back at our students. What's going to be best? What support will be put in place for our children to feel safe so they thrive within the district. So we don't want to turn around and pull everything and we don't have a plan in place, and that delays it even longer. So that's something that we need to be thinking about too as a board.
On recommendation 3, where the district is recommending that we divert whenever possible, who makes what's the definition of whenever possible, and who makes that decision? And related to that, and I know that, this is an estimate, if 40 of our 600 and some this year were diverted with this new recommendation, how would that 40 have been affected? Would it go to 60? Would it go to 400? I'm just curious.
So currently about 50% of our arrests come from that disorderly conduct over the course of not just this past year, over the course of the 4-year period that we measured the results. So we're really looking to, and when we say, we had a lot of conversations about disorderly conduct. Sometimes if it's a third offense, it's not like there will never be an arrest, but we want to make sure in a system and working in collaboration with CRPD, we do school consequences, we do supports, we offer the opportunity for diversion for our students before we ever get to that. Now they also pointed out sometimes students don't want diversion, right? Sometimes they move to that arrest. But at least we'd have an opportunity to do some proactive measures with students before we got to that point. In talking about what that looks like in guidelines, I have a draft sheet I can share with the board. It's completely a draft. We talked about it at the administrative meeting. We want to talk, I got this from another local school district that is not currently using SROs as a guideline for what they do for decision making. And having conversations with our administrators, they still make those really hard decisions on a regular basis, right? They don't look to somebody else to make them for them. They make them. Now they can make them collaboratively with the SRO, but they're still determining, do I involve the SRO on this or do I not? Do I say to the SRO, I think we need to move with charges? Do I keep it at a school discipline measure? So really working to identify, because we're going to be meeting with those principals on a regular basis, what does this matrix look like? And then if we are going to look at making an arrest, there's a conversation not only with the SRO and the admin, but the executive level director that can maybe be outside the box. We know there's emotion that gets put into play whenever we're dealing with any situations, especially a student that maybe did something wrong in a building. So that executive building level director can then have that conversation, ask some of those questions, give them a pause point of, is this best for the student to make their arrest? Is there other avenues we should take, and really help guide the principal and SRO and just help them be a think partner through that problem solving.
Okay, so it would be a collaborative conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay, and again, not that all 50% of those that you just identified would qualify, but it would be closer to that number than the less than 10% we have now. Okay, thank you.
Correct. And we have some of our processes and procedures in place right now that were meant to be equitable, that were created with the lens of providing equity. But when you give them to an administrator who's an extreme rule follower, sometimes the intent doesn't meet the goal, right? So sometimes we're like, oh, look at what I have to do in this paper. The district is telling me I have to contact law enforcement. This is illegal, and have them do something about, sorry about my analogy of the dime bag of marijuana in my pocket. Again, not that that's right. And I don't really have one, but just making sure people know that.
Have another question?
Yes, I do. With the exception of the possibility that we would remove the SROs from middle schools, it appears that all of our recommendations assume that we are retaining the SROs in our high schools. So my question is that an issue that we will revisit regularly? Is any decision we make now good for 1 year and then we revisit? I guess what I'm wondering is, what's the end goal here? Is this a step towards a goal, or here's what we're going to try now, we'll collect our data and see what we do next?
This is definitely a step towards the goal, right? And giving us an opportunity to do some things differently and really see what it looks like. Like even uniforms, people probably think I initially thought, how hard can that be? But I'm also not a part of the Cedar Rapids Police Department, right? So we had a lot of conversations. So the bike patrol with the khaki pants and the navy polo with all of still of their equipment, what does that look like? So really talking through and trying to get on the same page of mindset of what our goals are that we shared in the presentation. These are definitely step one, and we need to continue to analyze data internally. And when I say internally, our discipline data and our arrest data and all the pieces of what we're utilizing SROs for to do better for all of our students.
Were you done,
Yeah,
Director?
go ahead.
But I also want us to remember, this topic came to us based on high school students from the BSU that had a concern about the SROs in the high school. So I think we have to step back too and look at that. I know we're saying not the middle school, but this originated from students coming forward that were high school students and how they were feeling with the SROs in the school. So I don't want that to get lost in our discussion either.
I wanted to ask a real quick question following up on what Director Garlock said. In your conversations with Iowa City and Des Moines, they don't have SROs, never had them, and recently removed them. Was any thought given to recommending removing SROs entirely in our district? Was there any discussions about making that a recommendation?
Absolutely. I'll be honest, with that said, we've been collaboratively partnering, and that's never been a conversation that we've talked to CRPD as a partner with us on at this point. We haven't really given them an opportunity also to do things differently and given them direction of what we need. So this provides us that time in our high schools, in addition in Polk, to really make this look different and partner and work together. Currently, again, we're acknowledging the data doesn't look good, right? But we're also acknowledging the data doesn't look good because of us internally and how we're operating. And this is, hey, let's walk down this road together, let's partner together and really make something fabulous for students. And if we can't make something fabulous, then we need to look at doing something different and using resources differently. But right now, we haven't truly given that the full opportunity that we need to.
Following up on that, is there anything the board can do to make that move faster? Because as Superintendent Bush pointed out today, it was the first day of school today. And, if we assume that our survey data carries forward to our students that are in school today and moving forward, we likely have students who feel unsafe with SROs in the buildings. And so what are we doing for them in that interim period? Is that something we just have to accept because we're making the changes and we're trying to make the changes over time?
So it's a lot of communication. I think that what our students just based on the feedback from the surveys, they don't always know what the intended purpose is of the relationship. So it's a lot of proactive education, making sure that our students are aware of purpose and intent, and it will be visible changes, for example, soft uniforms. So kids actually being able to observe that. But it will have to be ongoing and constant communication and supporting all of our students. So I appreciate what Deputy Superintendent has said, is that we haven't made a concerted enough effort to intentionally make changes. So we've got to get better at getting better. So this is the first step. To your question, Director Garlock, this is the first step. And then we have to constantly assess, is what we're doing making a difference?
Another piece of learning from Des Moines, they removed them all at once, and their advice to us, and again, not with the goal of doing better, as Superintendent Bush said, but just acknowledging, they said, if we would have had more time to establish systems within our buildings without pulling them out, like all of a sudden they're here and then they're gone, we could have been more successful. They have made it work, but again, we have, high school principals that are used to relying and partnering with their SRO, and our SROs, I'm gonna say this again, do a fabulous job forming relationships with our staff and our students that they work with. So I think it's what could it look like eventually if we don't have them, and just really giving that opportunity to partner and see what can be better for us.
Well, and I think what's important, like, what do we put in place? We have to decide what we're going to do, but there has to be something in place, and that is my concern. As you can't turn around and say we're going to change this, and then, but we got to figure out how we're going to change it. We have to have everything in place, so we keep moving forward as a district. Any other?
I do have a couple of additional questions, and one is just based on what you were saying, President Humbles, about, needing to have a system in place. I'm wondering, I think it would be helpful to have a collaborative discussion with other support services to see what kind of time they need to be able to fill capacity for any kind of roles that we may be replacing. I don't think it does a service to our community partners to suddenly ask for 4 or 6 additional personnel without them having some time to be able to develop that staff. The other thing is a question kind of at a systems level. I hear a lot of talk, and I think I'm hearing common language and shared practice, which makes me excited that that's going to be used for the process in all of our schools and our data collection. I just want to make sure that the escalation process is consistent within that shared practice from school to school to school, so that when data is arriving at the board table, we're seeing clean and reliable data. So we're really comparing apples and apples and not apples and oranges. I'm also wondering how a data collection point would intersect with how the police department would be collecting data. Are they going to be collecting data similarly or in a different way, and then we're going to incorporate their data into the overall, or what's the plan there?
So great questions. With the data, they have the arrest data and so forth, and are going to submit the report that we're going to work on the details to. In addition, and on top of, we're working with Infinite Campus and our statisticians in the district on how, as administrators, we can track arrests, charges, contacts to parent from CRPD, so we can run reports and cross-reference that data and information to make sure we have everything accurate. Because again, sometimes it's challenging when you have a large system, but to make sure that everybody is doing the same process and procedure. And then we can have those conversations as a larger group on a quarterly basis and on a monthly basis as the SRO, building principal, executive director, and myself.
Thank you.
For the board members, I want to thank you. Was everyone finished with their questions? Because I don't want to cut anyone off. For your suggestions and your feedback to Superintendent Bush and Deputy Superintendent Quaker, and for those of you too that spoke, I appreciate that. And we look forward to further discussion around this topic. So the discussion it did not end here today. It will be ongoing. So with no further business, we stand adjourned. Thank you all.
Take care.
Another public speaker, now you know the trying to disrupt the That was our hope. That was the best.